The
see the
rain
difference
came
in the
down in
snow here.
sheets against the
He
Seattle
paused
apartment
before the
window,
storm hit.
each drop
He's heading
racing another
straight for
down the
that lower
glass like
ridge
tears
line.
on a cheek. Frank Hartwell sat in the darkness of his living room, the glow from the television casting blue shadows across his unshaven face. 48 years old, and he felt like 80. The Glock 19 rested on the coffee table before him, its black metal surface reflecting the flickering light from the nature documentary playing on the screen. Mountains, always mountains. The Absaroka Range in Montana, the narrator was saying, one of the last true wildernesses in America. Frank reached for the bourbon bottle. Empty. He had been sure there was another finger left. His hand trembled slightly as he set it back down. The apartment smelled of stale takeout and unwashed laundry. 2 years since Megan had taken Jesse and left. 2 years of supervised visits and court-ordered anger management classes. 2 years of watching his son grow more distant, more silent, more broken. The weight of what he had done, that one terrible moment when his fist had connected with Megan's jaw, hung around his neck like a millstone. On the screen, wolves move through the snow. The alpha male, the narrator explained, leads his pack through territories spanning hundreds of miles. They mate for life. They protect their young with ferocity that borders on the suicidal. Frank felt something crack inside his chest. He had protected nothing. He had destroyed everything. The phone buzzed. An unknown number. Frank almost ignored it. At this hour, past midnight, it could only be a wrong number, or worse. But something made him reach for it. Some final thread of hope or curiosity, or just the human need to hear another voice in the darkness. The voice on the other end was smooth, familiar in a way that made Frank's stomach tighten. Dalton Mercer, Megan's younger brother. They had been close once before everything fell apart, before Frank had proven himself to be exactly the kind of man Dalton had warned Megan about. "Frank," Dalton said. His voice carried none of the anger Frank expected, just a strange, measured calm. "I know what you're thinking about right now. I know where your head is at." Frank's eyes went to the gun. How the hell would Dalton know? But then again, Dalton had always been perceptive, sharp. The golden boy who had built Mercer Energy Solutions from nothing into a multi-million-dollar operation, while Frank was getting fired from Microsoft after 20 years of loyal service. "I'm calling about Jesse," Dalton continued. "The boy needs help, Frank. Real help. Megan's got him on medication now. Antidepressants, anxiety pills. He's 12 years old and he's medicated like he's 40. The words hit Frank like a physical blow. Jesse, his son, the boy who used to build Lego spaceships with him on Saturday mornings. The boy who had watched his father strike his mother and had never looked at him the same way again. "What kind of help?" Frank heard himself ask. His voice sounded hollow, distant, the kind that doesn't come from a pill bottle. Dalton paused, and Frank could hear something in that silence, something calculated. The boy needs to remember what it means to be strong, to be a man. He's soft, Frank. City soft. Spending all his time on that iPad, hiding in his room. He weighs 185 pounds. He gets bullied at school. He's becoming invisible. Each word was a nail driven into Frank's heart. He had done this. His absence, his failure, his violence had created this. "I'm organizing an expedition," Dalton said. 2 weeks in the Absaroka Range. Wilderness therapy. No phones, no technology, just the mountains and what a boy can learn about himself when he's pushed to his limits. "I want to take Jesse." Frank's hand tightened on the phone. His brother-in-law taking his son into the wilderness. There was something off about it, something that pinged in the back of his mind like a warning bell. "Why are you asking me?" Frank said. "Megan has custody." "Because Megan will say no." Dalton's voice hardened slightly. "She thinks the answer is more therapy, more medication, more coddling. But you and I both know that's not what builds a man. You were military, Frank. You understand what I'm talking about. Sometimes a boy needs to be broken down before he can be built back up." The words resonated in a dark, wounded part of Frank's soul. The part that remembered boot camp, remembered the Marines, remembered when he had been strong and purposeful and whole, before the corporate grind had softened him, before the stress and the drinking had turned him into something he despised. "What do you need from me?" Frank asked. "Just your signature. Permission slip for the expedition. Megan won't question it if you're on board. She'll think we finally found common ground." Frank closed his eyes. On the television, the wolves were howling. The sound carried through the empty apartment, primal and lonely and somehow true. When do you leave? Frank asked. 3 days. Dalton's voice carried a smile now. Trust me on this, Frank. 2 weeks from now, you'll have your son back. The real Jesse, not this medicated ghost. After he hung up, Frank sat in the darkness for a long time. The gun remained on the table, but his hand had moved away from it. On the screen, the documentary had moved on to grizzly bears, massive creatures that could kill a man with a single swipe of their paws. The narrator spoke about the balance of nature, about predator and prey, about the harsh laws that govern survival in the wilderness. Frank picked up his laptop and began researching Dalton Mercer. His brother-in-law had always been smooth, always been successful, but Frank realized he knew almost nothing about the man's current business. The Mercer Energy Solutions website showed a portfolio of hydroelectric projects, solar farms, geothermal installations. But when Frank dug deeper, following links and cross-references, he found something else. A proposed dam project in Montana, a massive undertaking that would flood several valleys and create a reservoir system worth billions. The project was stalled in legal battles, environmental groups, indigenous rights activists, and something about disputed land claims in the Absaroka Range. Frank leaned back. Maybe he was being paranoid. Maybe Dalton genuinely wanted to help Jesse. Or maybe there was something else at work here. But either way, his son would be out in the wilderness, away from the screens and the medication and the suffocating safety of Megan's overprotective care. Maybe that was worth the risk. He signed the permission form. 3 days later, Jesse Hartwell stood in the parking lot of a Seattle outdoor outfitter, watching his uncle Dalton load gear into a massive Ford F-350. The boy wore an oversized hoodie despite the mild September weather. The hood pulled up to shadow his face. His backpack, brand new and still creased from the packaging, hung heavy on his shoulders. Inside were clothes his mother had carefully folded and labeled, medications in a Ziploc bag, and an iPad that Dalton had already told him would be confiscated at the trailhead. Jesse was short for his age, barely 5 feet tall, and his weight gave him a round, soft appearance that made him a target at school. His hands were pale and uncalloused. His fingernails were bitten to the quick. When Dalton spoke to him, Jesse nodded without making eye contact, a habit that had become so ingrained his mother no longer tried to correct it. Megan Hartwell stood nearby, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She was a thin woman, angular and tense, with worry lines that had not been there 3 years ago. She kept glancing at Jesse as if he might disappear if she looked away too long. "You have his medications," she said to Dalton for the third time. "The dosages are written down. He takes the blue pill in the morning and the white pill at night. If he seems agitated or withdrawn, there's an emergency anxiety medication in the red bottle." Dalton smiled with practiced patience. "It's all packed, Meg. But honestly, 2 weeks in the mountains might be better than any pill. Fresh air, physical challenge, no screens." Megan's jaw tightened. "He has a medical condition, Dalton. Anxiety disorder is real. It's not something you just hike away." "I understand that." Dalton put a hand on her shoulder. "But you've tried therapy. You've tried medication. Nothing's working. Let me try this. 2 weeks. If it doesn't help, at least we'll know we tried something different." Jesse watched this exchange with dull eyes. Nobody was asking him what he wanted. Nobody ever asked. His mother had decided he needed medication. His father had decided he needed toughening up. His uncle had decided he needed the wilderness. Jesse just wanted to be left alone in his room where the world couldn't touch him. A van pulled into the parking lot. 2 men got out, both in their 30s, both with the lean, weathered look of professional outdoorsmen. Dalton introduced them as Colt and Wade, guides who worked with his company on backcountry surveys. They nodded at Jesse without really seeing him. Just another soft city kid who would probably cry for his mother within the first 2 days. The drive from Seattle to Montana took 12 hours with stops. Jesse sat in the back seat, staring out the window as the landscape changed from urban sprawl to farmland to forest. The mountains rose in the distance, dark and ancient and indifferent. Jesse felt a knot of fear in his stomach, but also something else. Something that might have been curiosity, or maybe just a desperate hope that somewhere out there, in all that wilderness, he might find a version of himself that didn't feel so small and scared and wrong. They reached the trailhead at dusk. The parking area was empty except for one other vehicle, a beat-up Jeep that looked like it had been there for weeks. Dalton gathered everyone around the tailgate and laid out the plan. 2 weeks. They would hike into the Absaroka Range, following old mining trails that dated back to the gold rush days. The destination was a high valley near Caldwell Springs, named after the family that had originally claimed the land in the 1880s. Beautiful country, Dalton said. Remote, no cell service, no contact with the outside world. Just us and the mountains. He made Jesse hand over his iPad. The boy hesitated, clutching it like a lifeline, but eventually surrendered it. Dalton placed it in a locked box in the truck. Then he distributed packs. Jesse's was heavy, at least 40 pounds. When he tried to lift it, he nearly fell backward. You'll get used to it, Colt said, not unkindly, but not kindly either. Just stating a fact. They hiked until full darkness, covering maybe 3 miles on a relatively gentle trail. Jesse fell behind immediately, his breath coming in ragged gasps, sweat soaking through his hoodie. Every 100 yards he had to stop. His legs trembled. His back ached. Blisters were already forming on his heels despite the expensive new boots his mother had bought. Dalton walked beside him for a while, offering encouragement that felt more like criticism wrapped in positive words. You've got this, Jesse. Mind over matter. Your body is capable of more than you think. But eventually, even Dalton moved ahead, leaving Jesse to struggle along in the rear, with Wade trailing behind him like a sheepdog keeping a straggler with the flock. They made camp in a small clearing. Jesse collapsed onto the ground, unable to even help set up the tents. He pulled off his boots to find his socks bloody. The blisters had popped. Wade tossed him a first aid kit without comment. Dinner was freeze-dried, camping food rehydrated, with boiled water from a nearby stream. Jesse could barely eat. His stomach churned with exhaustion and fear and a deep, aching loneliness. He thought about his room back home, his soft bed, his mother's voice calling him down for dinner. Even school, with all its horrors, seemed preferable to this. That night, lying in his sleeping bag in the tent he shared with Colt, Jesse heard sounds he had never heard before. The rustling of animals in the undergrowth, the distant scream of something that might have been a mountain lion, the wind moving through the trees like breathing. He took one of his anxiety pills dry, choking it down, and eventually fell into a fitful sleep filled with dreams of being chased through endless forests. The next 5 days established a brutal pattern. Wake before dawn, eat a minimal breakfast. Hike. The trails grew steeper, rockier, less maintained. Jesse fell further and further behind. His muscles screamed. His feet became masses of broken blisters and raw flesh. He cried quietly, where the others wouldn't see. But he kept going because what choice did he have? There was no cell service, no way to call for help, no way back except forward. Dalton grew less patient as the days passed. The encouraging words disappeared, replaced by sharp commands. Move faster, Jesse. We're burning daylight. Stop being weak. Your father was a Marine, for God's sake. Find some backbone. On the 4th day, Jesse discovered something that changed everything. They had stopped for a break near a steep rock face. Jesse, sitting apart from the others as always, noticed that Dalton's pack had partially opened. Inside, visible through the gap, was a metal box about the size of a large book. Expensive looking, locked, and peeking out from beneath it, the corner of what looked like an old map. Jesse's heart began to pound. He waited until the others were distracted, then edged closer. His hand was shaking as he reached into the pack. The map was folded, yellowed with age, marked with symbols and notations in faded ink. He could only glimpse a portion of it before he heard footsteps and had to pull back. But he had seen enough. A star marking a location, the words Hartwell Claim 1889 written in careful script, and a notation, water rights primary source. Hartwell, his own family name. Jesse's mind raced. His mother had mentioned once that her grandfather's people had come from Montana. Homesteaders or miners, she thought, but she had never been interested in genealogy. But this map was in Dalton's pack, and they were heading towards something called Caldwell Springs. Hartwell, Caldwell, close enough to be related. That evening, Jesse worked up the courage to ask about it. They were sitting around the campfire, eating another cheerless meal of reheated rations. Jesse cleared his throat. The sound was so unusual that everyone turned to look at Moss. He so rarely spoke. Uncle Dalton, Jesse said, his voice cracked. Why are we really here? Dalton's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. What do you mean, Jesse? We're here to help you learn some self-reliance. I saw the map in your pack. The Hartwell Claim. That's my family name. The silence that followed was heavy. Colt and Wade exchanged glances. Dalton set down his food slowly, deliberately. Then he smiled, but it was a cold smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "You're smarter than you look," he said. "Yes, Jesse, this trip is about more than character building. Your great-great-grandfather, Samuel Hartwell, filed a land claim in these mountains in 1889. Prime territory, mountain springs that feed into three river systems. Today, those water rights would be worth millions, tens of millions, but the claim was disputed. Another family, the Caldwells, said the land was theirs. It went to court in the 1930s, and the judgment was inconclusive. The land went into a kind of legal limbo. No one owns it, no one can develop it, until someone proves legitimate descent and files the proper paperwork." Jesse felt dizzy. "And I'm that someone. You're the direct male descendant. Your father didn't care about any of this. Too busy drinking himself to death. But I care. My company needs that land. We're planning a hydroelectric project that would power half of Montana. Clean energy, jobs, progress. But we need clear title. We need the heir to sign off." Jesse's throat was tight. "So this whole thing, you don't care about helping me? You just want me to sign some papers?" Dalton leaned forward. "I care about making you useful, Jesse. Right now, you're nothing. A fat kid who hides in his room and takes pills to get through the day. But you could be someone. You could be part of something important. All you have to do is trust me." "And if I don't," Jesse whispered. Dalton's smile vanished. "Then you'll learn what real hardship feels like." The blow came without warning. Dalton's hand shot out and struck Jesse across the face. Not hard enough to seriously injure, but hard enough to snap his head to the side and leave a stinging red mark. Jesse fell backward, tears springing to his eyes, tasting blood from a split lip. "That's for snooping through my things," Dalton said calmly. "And that's a preview of what happens to people who get in my way." Colt and Wade said nothing. They didn't move to help Jesse. They just watched with the flat, indifferent eyes of men who had seen worse and would see worse again. Jesse scrambled to his feet and ran. He crashed through the darkening forest, branches whipping his face, his injured feet screaming, his breath coming in sobs. Behind him, he heard Dalton call out, but not in pursuit, just a warning. "Don't go far, Jesse. There are worse things than me in these mountains." Jesse ran until he couldn't run anymore. Then he walked, stumbling, his face wet with tears and blood. The forest had grown fully dark. He had no light, no supplies, no idea where he was going. He just knew he couldn't go back to that camp, couldn't face Dalton's cold eyes and false smile. Eventually, exhausted beyond thought, Jesse collapsed at the base of a massive pine tree. He curled into a ball, shivering, and closed his eyes. In his mind, he saw his father's face. Frank Hartwell, who had hit his mother, who drank too much, who had failed at everything that mattered, but who was still somehow the only person Jesse wanted right now. "Dad," Jesse whispered into the darkness, "please, I need you." But his father was 500 miles away in Seattle, and Jesse was alone in the wilderness with men who saw him as nothing more than a signature on a piece of paper. He must have slept, though it didn't feel like sleep, more like his consciousness simply shut down from exhaustion. When he woke, it was to the sound of voices. Dalton and the guides calling his name. Not worried voices, annoyed voices. "Jesse, get back here. Stop being dramatic. We don't have time for this." Jesse stayed silent and still. The voices moved past his position, searching in the wrong direction. Eventually, they faded. Jesse waited another hour, then slowly got to his feet. His entire body was stiff and aching. His face throbbed where Dalton had struck him. But his mind was clearer than it had been in months. He couldn't go back. That much was obvious. But he also couldn't survive out here alone. He had no food, no water purification, no shelter. The temperature at night dropped below 40 degrees. There were bears in these mountains, mountain lions, wolves. A soft city kid with no survival skills would be dead within days. Jesse began to walk, choosing directions at random. The sun was rising somewhere beyond the thick canopy, but he couldn't see it clearly enough to orient himself. He just moved, hoping against hope that he would stumble onto a trail or a road or another group of hikers. Anything. By midday, he was desperately thirsty. He found a stream and drank directly from it, knowing it was probably unsafe but unable to stop himself. The water was so cold it made his teeth ache. He splashed it on his face, washing away the dried blood and tears. On the second day alone, hunger became a constant, gnawing presence. Jesse tried eating berries from a bush, but within an hour he was vomiting violently. The berries had been baneberries, he would later learn, poisonous, not deadly in small amounts, but enough to make him violently ill. He lay by the stream, retching until there was nothing left, his body convulsing with cramps. By the third day he was feverish. The combination of infected blisters, dehydration, and poisoning had pushed his body past its limits. He hallucinated, seeing his mother standing in the forest, calling his name, seeing his father sober and strong, reaching down to lift him up. But when he reached back, there was nothing. On the morning of the fourth day, Jesse woke to find he was not alone. Something had left food. A dead snowshoe hare, its neck cleanly broken, placed carefully on a flat rock 3 feet from where Jesse lay. Jesse stared at it, his fever-addled mind struggling to process. He hadn't heard anything, hadn't seen anything, but someone or something had been there. He managed to create a small fire using a technique he vaguely remembered from a YouTube video. The meat was gamey and tough, but it was protein, and his body needed it desperately. As he ate, Jesse scanned the forest around him, looking for his mysterious benefactor. He saw nothing but trees and shadows, but he felt watched, and somehow that feeling was not entirely frightening. On the fifth day, near collapse, Jesse heard something that made him freeze. The sound of an axe biting into wood. The rhythmic thunk, thunk, thunk carried through the still forest air. Human activity, civilization, rescue. Jesse stumbled toward the sound, his vision swimming. He crashed through undergrowth, tripped over roots, but kept moving. The sound grew louder. And then, breaking through a screen of pines, Jesse saw him. An old man, working alone in a clearing. He was chopping wood with practiced efficiency. His movements economical and precise despite his age. He wore clothes that looked handmade from animal hides and rough cloth. His hair was long and gray, pulled back from a face that was deeply lined and weathered like old leather. When he turned to look at Jesse, his eyes were dark and sharp and completely unsurprised. Jesse tried to speak but found he couldn't. His legs gave out. He collapsed onto the forest floor, and the last thing he saw before unconsciousness claimed him was the old man setting down his axe and walking toward him. When Jesse woke, he was lying on a bed inside a cabin. Not a modern cabin with electricity and plumbing, but a true wilderness dwelling. Handmade furniture, a wood stove radiating heat, animal skins on the walls, herbs hanging from the rafters, and the smell of something cooking that made Jesse's stomach clench with desperate hunger. The old man sat in a chair nearby, watching Jesse with those penetrating dark eyes. He didn't speak, just watched. Jesse tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest. "Easy," the old man said finally. His voice was rough, unused to frequent speech. "You've been running on empty for days. Body needs to recover." "Who are you?" Jesse managed to croak. "Raymond Crowfoot. Most people call me Ray." He paused. "Used to be a ranger in these mountains. Long time ago." "I need help," Jesse said. The words tumbled out in a rush. "My uncle, he brought me out here, but it wasn't really to help me. He wants me to sign papers. He hit me. I ran away. I'm lost. I don't know how to get home." Ray held up a hand, silencing him. "I know," he said simply. "You know? How could you know?" "Because I've been tracking your uncle's party since they entered my mountains 5 days ago. And I've been tracking you since you ran." Jesse stared at him, trying to process this. "You've been following me? Were you the one who left the rabbit?" Ray nodded slowly. "You would have died without food, but I needed to see what kind of person you were before I made contact. Needed to see if you would quit or keep moving." "And?" Jesse asked, his voice small. "You kept moving." Ray stood and ladled something from a pot on the stove into a wooden bowl. "That means something." He handed the bowl to Jesse. "Elk stew. Eat slowly or you'll be sick." Jesse ate, and it was the most delicious thing he had ever tasted. As he ate, Ray began to clean and bandage his feet. The old man's hands were gentle but firm. He didn't comment on the state of Jesse's blisters, just worked with practiced efficiency. "Your Uncle Dalton Mercer is a dangerous man," Ray said as he worked. "I know about the Hartwell claim. I know about his dam project. I know what he's willing to do to get what he wants." "How do you know all this?" Jesse asked. "Because 25 years ago, Dalton Mercer killed my son." The words hung in the air between them. Jesse stopped eating, the spoon halfway to his mouth. Ray's expression didn't change. He finished bandaging Jesse's feet and sat back. My son was Daniel Crowfoot. He was a young ranger, 20 years old, smart, idealistic. He caught Dalton starting fires in the forest, controlled burns, Dalton called them. But Daniel knew better. Dalton was trying to devalue the land, make it look worthless so the government would sell it cheap. They argued. Dalton pushed him off a cliff, made it look like an accident. Jesse felt cold despite the warmth of the cabin. Did you tell anyone? I tried, but Dalton had money, lawyers. He paid the right people. The investigation ruled it an accident. I quit the ranger service, came up here, been watching these mountains ever since, making sure no one else gets hurt by men like your uncle. Jesse set down the bowl. So what happens now? What am I supposed to do? Ray looked at him for a long moment. That depends on you, boy. You can try to go home, report what happened, hope the authorities believe you. But you're a kid with anxiety disorder and a history of medication. Dalton will say you ran away, got confused, made up stories. He'll have his guides back him up. And in the meantime, he'll find another way to get what he wants. Or, Jesse whispered, or you stay here, learn to survive, get strong, wait for your uncle to make a mistake. And when he does, you make sure he pays for it. Jesse looked around the cabin, at the primitive but functional tools, at the animal skins and dried herbs, at the life this old man had built for himself in complete isolation from the modern world. It should have seemed terrifying. It should have made Jesse want to run screaming back to civilization. But instead, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, a small, fragile spark that might have been hope, or purpose, or maybe just the possibility of becoming something other than the scared, medicated, invisible boy he had always been. How long, Jesse asked. How long would I need to stay? Ray stood in and moved to the window, looking out at the mountains beyond. As long as it takes, he said. Could be weeks, could be months. These mountains don't work on our schedule, boy. They work on their own time. Jesse thought about his mother, who would be frantic by now. His father, who might not even know he was missing. Dalton, who was probably already spinning a story about the tragic loss of his nephew in the wilderness. And he thought about the map, the Hartwell claim. Water rights worth millions, a legacy he had never asked for, but that had nearly gotten him killed. Okay, Jesse said. His voice was quiet but steady. Teach me. Ray turned from the window and something that might have been a smile crossed his weathered face. First lesson, he said, survival isn't about being the strongest or saying the fastest. It's about being the one who refuses to quit. You already know that lesson. You just didn't know you knew it. Over the following days, as Jesse's body slowly healed from his ordeal, Ray began his education in earnest, not with complex techniques or advanced skills, but with the basics. How to purify water, how to identify edible plants, how to build a fire in wet conditions, how to read the weather from the shape of clouds and the behavior of animals. Jesse learned that his pudgy body, which had been such a source of shame, was actually an advantage in the wilderness. The extra weight meant reserves of energy, insulation against cold. Ray taught him to see his body not as something wrong, but as a tool that could be adapted and strengthened. He learned that his anxiety, that constant companion that had required medication, was simply his nervous system being overly vigilant. In the city, it was a disorder. But out here, in a place where real threats existed, that heightened awareness was useful. Ray taught him to channel it, to listen to it without being controlled by it. Most importantly, Jesse learned that he was not inherently weak. He had simply never been tested. And now, tested by necessity and guided by a patient if stern teacher, he began to discover capabilities he had never known existed. By the end of the second week in the mountains, Jesse Hartwell was not the same boy who had left Seattle. His body had begun to change, the softness burning away to reveal muscle beneath. His hands had developed calluses. His feet, though still healing, had toughened. His eyes had learned to see in the dim light of dawn and dusk. His ears had learned to filter the constant sounds of the forest and pick out anomalies. And somewhere deep inside, in a place he couldn't quite name, something else had changed too. The constant voice of self-doubt and fear had not disappeared, but it had grown quieter, replaced by something new. A voice that said, maybe you can, maybe you will, maybe you are enough. One evening, as they sat by the fire outside Ray's cabin, Jesse asked the question that had been growing in his mind. The rabbit, the one you left for me when I was sick, How did you kill it without me hearing? Ray poked at the fire with a stick. Didn't kill it, he said. Then who did? Ray looked up at the darkening sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. Been 7 wolves in these mountains for the past 3 years. A pack that's barely surviving. Hunted by ranchers. Poisoned by government agents. Down to just 6 adults now and a few pups. They don't trust humans. They shouldn't. Humans have given them nothing but death. Jesse waited, sensing there was more. But sometimes, Ray continued, when something is dying, they make exceptions. They brought you that rabbit, not me. Why would they do that? Ray shrugged. The Crow people, my mother's people, they believed wolves could see things we couldn't. See into a person's spirit. Maybe they saw something in you worth saving. Jesse looked out into the darkness beyond the firelight. Somewhere out there, wolves were moving through their territory, hunting, surviving, and apparently, inexplicably, watching over a lost boy from Seattle. Have you ever seen them? Jesse asked. Once, Ray said, 2 years ago. The alpha female. She was injured, caught in an illegal trap. I freed her. She looked at me, and I swear to God, boy, it was like looking into the eyes of something ancient. Something that understood more than any animal should. Then she left. Never saw her again. But sometimes I hear them, howling, and I know they're still out there. That night, Jesse lay in the small loft bed Ray had fashioned for him, listening to the sounds of the night. And somewhere in the distance, faint but unmistakable, he heard it. The howl of a wolf, long and mournful and somehow reassuring, as if the mountains themselves were singing him to sleep. Jesse closed his eyes, and for the first time since being abandoned, he felt something like peace. His uncle was still out there. The danger was still real. He was still lost in the wilderness with winter approaching and no clear path home. But he was not alone. He had Ray. He had the mountains. And somewhere in the darkness, he had wolves watching over him. And that, Jesse thought, as sleep finally claimed him, might just be enough. The dawn came cold to the Absaroka Mountains, painting the peaks in shades of gold and crimson that seemed almost violent in their beauty. Jesse Hartwell stood outside Ray Crowfoot's cabin, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air, watching the sun climb over ridges that had stood unchanged for millions of years. 3 weeks had passed since he had stumbled into this clearing, half dead from exposure and poisoning. 3 weeks that felt like 3 years, or maybe 3 lifetimes. His body had changed in ways that still surprised him when he caught his reflection in the still water of the nearby creek. The softness around his middle had melted away, revealing the outline of muscles he hadn't known existed. His face had become leaner, more angular. His hands were no longer the pale, unblemished hands of a city boy, but were now marked with calluses and small scars. Each one a lesson learned through trial and error. The infected blisters that had nearly crippled him had healed into tough, thickened skin. But the physical changes were nothing compared to what had happened inside. The constant buzz of anxiety that had been his companion for as long as he could remember had not disappeared. Ray had been clear about that. You don't cure anxiety, boy. You learn to work with it, like a current in a river. Fight it and you drown. Flow with it and it carries you where you need to go. Ray emerged from the cabin carrying 2 bowls of what he called breakfast stew. Elk meat from a bull Ray had taken down 2 months prior, mixed with wild onions and pine nuts. The old man moved with the economy of someone who had lived alone for so long that every action had been refined to its essential form. No wasted motion, no unnecessary words. Today we build your shelter, Ray said, handing Jesse a bowl. Can't have you sleeping in my loft forever like some orphan pup. Jesse ate quickly. He had learned that Ray's lessons began without warning and often without explanation. The old man believed in teaching through doing rather than talking. Show once, let the student struggle. Correct only when failure becomes dangerous. It was a harsh pedagogy, but Jesse had come to respect it. Everything Ray taught had purpose. Nothing was theoretical. They walked into the forest, Ray in the lead, moving with a silence that Jesse tried to emulate but couldn't quite achieve. His footsteps still snapped twigs, still rustled leaves. Ray's footsteps seemed to find the quiet spaces between the sounds of the forest, as if he moved in harmony with the land rather than across it. They stopped in a small clearing about half a mile from Ray's cabin. Close enough for safety, Ray explained. Far enough for independence. A boy becoming a man needs his own space. Needs to know he can survive alone. The clearing was perhaps 20 feet across, ringed by Douglas firs and lodgepole pines. A small stream, barely more than a trickle, ran along one edge. Ray knelt and dug his fingers into the earth, testing its composition. Good drainage, he said. Won't flood in spring melt. See how the ground slopes away from this center point? Water moves around, not through. Jesse knelt beside him, mimicking the gesture. The soil was dark and rich, mixed with decomposed needles and small stones. He was learning to read the land like Ray did, to see it not as a blank canvas, but as a text written in minerals and moisture, in the way plants grew and animals moved. First rule of shelter, Ray continued, standing and surveying the space. Think like the forest. Don't fight it. Use what's here. That pine over there, see how it leans? Storm damaged 3 winters back. It'll come down in the next big wind. Better we take it down now, controlled. It becomes your main beam. Over the next hours, Ray taught Jesse how to fell a tree properly. Not with the mindless hacking Jesse had seen in movies, but with precision and respect. 2 cuts, forming a wedge on the side you want it to fall. Then the back cut, slightly higher, leaving a hinge of wood that guides the descent. When the pine finally fell, it landed exactly where Ray had predicted, with a crash that sent birds exploding from the surrounding trees. They spent the rest of that day in 2 more cutting, stripping, and positioning logs. Ray demonstrated how to notch the ends so they locked together, creating walls that would hold without nails or rope. How to select the right logs, straight and of similar diameter. How to test each piece for rot or insect damage. How to leave gaps for a door and a small window that would face south for winter light and summer ventilation. Jesse's muscles screamed. His back became a constant ache. Splinters embedded themselves in his palms despite the calluses. But he didn't complain. Complaining, he had learned, was wasted energy. Ray didn't care about pain. He cared about results. On the 4th day, as they were raising the roof beams, Jesse made a mistake. He positioned a beam incorrectly, and when Ray placed weight on it, the whole structure shifted. For a moment, it seemed the entire wall would collapse. Ray moved with startling speed for a man his age, bracing the failing section with his shoulder, while Jesse scrambled to reposition the beam. When the crisis was averted and the structure secured, Ray turned to Jesse with an expression that was not anger, but something harder, disappointment. "What did you do wrong?" Ray asked. "I put the beam on backward. The notch was facing the wrong direction." "And why did you put it on backward?" Jesse hesitated. "I wasn't paying attention. I was thinking about something else." Ray nodded slowly. "In the city, not paying attention means you bump into someone or miss your bus stop. Out here, it means you die, or worse, you get someone else killed. Every action has weight, boy. Every decision matters. You understand?" "Yes, sir," Jesse said quietly. Ray's expression softened slightly. "Good. Now fix it. And this time be present. Be here. Not in your head. Not in your past, not in your worries. Here. Now, this wood, this moment." It took another week to complete the shelter. When it was finished, Jesse stood back and looked at what they had created. It was not large, perhaps 8 feet by 10 feet. The walls were rough, the roof covered with overlapping strips of bark sealed with pine pitch. But it was solid, it was weatherproof, and he had built it with his own hands. That night, Ray brought over a bundle wrapped in oiled cloth. Inside was a sleeping bag, not new but well-maintained, and a small wood stove, rusted but functional. "These were my sons," Ray said. His voice was matter-of-fact, but Jesse heard the weight beneath the words. "Daniels. He won't be needing them anymore. You will." Jesse took the bundle, feeling the responsibility of it, wearing a dead man's legacy, a man killed by the same person who had tried to use Jesse as a pawn. "Thank you," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. That night, Jesse slept in his own shelter for the first time. The wood stove cast dancing shadows on the log walls. Outside, the wind moved through the pines with a sound like breathing. Jesse lay in Daniel Crowfoot's sleeping bag and thought about the man who had owned it. 20 years old, a ranger, someone who had stood up to corruption and paid the ultimate price. "I'll make it mean something," Jesse whispered to the darkness. "Your death. I'll make sure it meant something." No response came from the shadows, but in the distance, so faint Jesse almost thought he imagined it, a wolf howled. And then another, and another, a whole chorus of them, their voices weaving together in a song that was both mournful and defiant. The weeks that followed established a rhythm that Jesse's body and mind adapted to with surprising ease. Each morning he woke before dawn, started a fire, prepared a simple breakfast from the supplies Ray had shown him how to preserve and store. Then came the lessons. Ray taught him to track, not just to follow obvious prints in mud, but to read the story written in bent grass and disturbed pebbles. A deer had passed here 3 hours ago, moving quickly, probably spooked by something. A mountain lion had marked this tree 2 days prior. A family of raccoons denned in that hollow log. He taught him to hunt, not with guns, which were too loud and too dependent on ammunition that would eventually run out, but with snares and deadfalls. How to identify game trails. How to set a trigger that would release at the right pressure. How to check traps in a circuit that minimize wasted effort. He taught him about plants, which roots could be eaten and which would kill you. How to make tea from pine needles that prevented scurvy. How to prepare willow bark into a pain reliever. How to recognize the season for harvesting different foods, and how to preserve them for winter. But more than techniques, Ray taught Jesse how to think, how to observe without judgment, how to solve problems by working with natural systems rather than against them, how to be patient, how to accept discomfort without panic, how to distinguish between fear that warned of real danger and anxiety that created phantom threats. One afternoon, Ray took Jesse to a place he called the Teaching Rock. It was a massive granite boulder that jutted from the earth like the bone of the mountain itself. The surface was smooth, worn by 10,000 years of wind and weather, and covering it, faded but still visible, were petroglyphs, images carved by hands that had turned to dust centuries ago. My mother's people made these, Ray said, running his fingers over the carved lines. Crow. Before that, others whose names we've forgotten. This was a vision site. Young men would come here, fast for days, wait for dreams that would show them their path. What did they see? Jesse asked. Ray shrugged. Different things. Some saw animals that became their guides. Some saw storms or stars. Some saw nothing and went home unchanged. He turned to look at Jesse. What do you see when you close your eyes now, boy? What appears in your dreams? Jesse thought about it. His dreams since coming to the mountains had changed. No longer the anxiety nightmares of school and social failure. Now he dreamed of running through forests, of standing on high ridges with wind in his face. And again he dreamed of wolves. Not threatening, just present, watching him with those intelligent yellow eyes. Wolves, Jesse admitted. I keep dreaming about wolves. Ray nodded as if this confirmed something he already knew. The wolf is a good guide, loyal, fierce, misunderstood. People fear wolves because wolves remind them of what they've lost, the wild part of themselves, the part that knows how to survive without all the softness civilization wraps around us. Have you seen them, Jesse asked, since that time with the alpha female? Pieces of them. Tracks, scat, heard them plenty, but no, haven't seen them clear. They're careful, smart. They know humans mean death more often than not. Do you think they're still watching me? Ray was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes scanning the forest around them. I think, he said finally, that the mountains have claimed you. And when the mountains claim someone, the wolves know. They're the mountains' guardians. Always have been. That night, Jesse lay in his shelter and thought about what Ray had said. The mountains have claimed you. He felt the truth of it in his bones. Seattle seemed like a dream now. His old life, his old self, felt like something that had happened to someone else. The boy who had been afraid of his own shadow, who had needed pills to get through a school day, who had been invisible to everyone except bullies. That boy was gone. In his place was someone new, someone still forming, still learning, but someone who could build shelter and set snares and read the language of animal tracks. Someone who could survive. A sound brought Jesse fully alert. Scratching just outside his shelter, his hand went instinctively to the hunting knife Ray had given him, a simple but effective tool with a bone handle worn smooth by Daniel Crowfoot's hands. The scratching came again, rhythmic, deliberate, too deliberate to be an animal investigating randomly. Jesse moved to the small window, peering out into the darkness. The moon was 3/4 full, providing enough light to see shapes but not details. And there, not 10 feet from his door, stood a wolf. It was massive, larger than Jesse had imagined wolves could be. Its coat was gray with darker patches along the shoulders and spine. And even in the dim light, Jesse could see its eyes. One yellow eye, bright and piercing. The other eye was gone, replaced by a mass of scar tissue that had healed over the socket. Gray, the alpha male Ray had mentioned, it had to be. The wolf regarded Jesse through the window with its single eye. There was no aggression in its posture. Its ears were up, but not pinned back. Its tail was neutral. It simply stood there, looking at the boy in the shelter, as if taking his measure. Jesse didn't move, didn't breathe. This moment felt sacred somehow, important in a way he couldn't articulate. Then slowly the wolf turned its head and looked back toward the darkness of the forest. Jesse followed its gaze and felt his heart stutter. More shapes emerging from the shadows. 5 adult wolves and 3 younger ones, not quite pups, but not yet fully grown. The pack. They arranged themselves in a loose semicircle, all facing Jesse's shelter. The message was clear. We see you, we know you're here. We've decided to let you be. Gray turned back to Jesse. Jesse held his gaze for another long moment, then threw back his head and howled. The sound was pure and primal, a declaration that seemed to resonate in Jesse's chest. One by one, the other pack members joined in until the night was filled with their song. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, they were gone, melting back into the forest like smoke. Jesse stood at the window for a long time after, his heart pounding, his knife forgotten in his hand. He had just been accepted, acknowledged, by creatures that had every reason to fear and hate humans. In the morning, Jesse walked to Ray's cabin and told him what had happened. The old man listened without interruption, his weathered face unreadable. When Jesse finished, Ray was silent for several minutes, staring into his morning fire. Gray doesn't appear to just anyone, Ray said finally. I've lived in these mountains for 25 years, and I've seen him maybe 3 times. He's old, that wolf, must be 12, 13 years. Ancient for a wild animal. The fact that he brought the whole pack to see you, that means something. What does it mean, Jesse asked. Ray looked at him with those dark, knowing eyes. It means you're pack now, boy. In their minds, you're one of them, under their protection. But that's not a gift without price. If you're pack, you have responsibilities. Wolves don't tolerate weakness, don't tolerate betrayal. You understand what I'm saying? I think so, Jesse said, though he wasn't entirely sure. It means you can't go back to being soft, can't go back to being prey. You're something else now, something that has to earn its place every day. The lessons intensified after that night. Ray pushed Jesse harder, demanded more. They went on longer expeditions, sometimes spending 3 or 4 days away from the cabins. Ray taught him how to navigate by stars and sun position, how to estimate distance and time, how to find shelter in landscapes that seemed to offer none, how to stay warm in freezing temperatures without artificial heat, how to ration food and water, how to keep moving when every muscle screamed for rest. And Jesse rose to meet these demands, not because he was naturally gifted or particularly strong, but because failure was not an option. The mountains didn't care about his feelings or his limitations. The mountains simply were. And to survive in them, he had to be equally immutable. One night, 6 weeks into his time in the wilderness, they were camped on a high ridge when Ray spoke about his son for the first time since giving Jesse Daniel's belongings. Daniel was idealistic, Ray said, staring into their small fire. Believed the system worked. Believed that if you did the right thing, justice would follow. I tried to teach him that the world didn't work that way, that power protects power, but he wouldn't listen. Jesse waited, sensing there was more. He caught Dalton Mercer red-handed, had photos, documentation. Dalton was starting fires, small ones, controlled, making the forest look like it was dying so the government would sell the land cheap. Environmental disaster, Dalton would say. Better to salvage what we can. Develop it before it's worthless. Ray's jaw tightened. Daniel was going to expose him. Had a meeting scheduled with federal investigators. 3 days before that meeting, Daniel fell off a cliff while on routine patrol. Was Dalton with him? Jesse asked quietly. Official reports said no, said Daniel was alone. But there was a witness, a hunter who saw 2 men on that cliff, saw them arguing, saw one push the other. Ray's hands clenched into fists. Dalton paid the hunter to disappear, paid the investigators to look the other way, paid everyone who needed paying. Money buys truth in this world, or buries it. Why didn't you do something, Jesse asked, then immediately regretted the question. But Ray didn't take offense. I tried, hired lawyers, filed appeals, wrote letters to every authority I could find. But I was just a grieving father with no proof. And Dalton was a successful businessman with connections. Eventually, I realized the system wasn't going to give me justice. So I came up here to wait. Wait for what? Ray looked at Jesse with eyes that held a cold, patient fury. For Dalton to come back. Men like him always come back. They can't leave well enough alone. They have to conquer, have to own, have to dominate. I knew he'd return eventually. And when he did, I'd be here. And now he has, Jesse said. And now he has, Ray agreed. With you. Using you the same way he uses everything, as a tool to get what he wants. What happens when he realizes I'm not coming back? That I'm not lost or dead, but hiding? Ray poked at the fire with a stick. Then things get dangerous. Because Dalton doesn't accept failure. He'll come looking, he'll bring more men, better equipped. And he won't stop until he finds you or confirms you're dead. Jesse felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Should I leave? Go to the authorities? And tell them what? That your uncle hit you and you ran away? That you're living in the wilderness with an old hermit? They'll send you back to your mother, put you on more medication, and Dalton will get to work on his project unimpeded. Ray shook his head. No, boy, you stay, you learn, you get strong, and when the time comes, we deal with Dalton together. How? Jesse asked. How do we deal with him? Ray smiled, but it was not a kind smile. We do what the wolves would do. We protect our territory. We make him understand that some places are not his to take. In the following weeks, Ray taught Jesse skills that went beyond mere survival. He taught him how to move through the forest without leaving traces, how to observe without being observed, how to set up concealed positions with clear sightlines, how to recognize when he was being tracked, and how to lay false trails. These were not the skills of a wilderness enthusiast. These were the skills of a soldier or a hunter of men. Jesse didn't question this education. He absorbed it with the same focused intensity he had applied to everything else. Some part of him understood that this knowledge would be necessary, that the confrontation Ray spoke of was not hypothetical, but inevitable. 2 months after Jesse had stumbled into Ray's clearing, the first snow fell. It came overnight, a light dusting that turned the world into something clean and new and terrifyingly beautiful. Jesse woke in his shelter to find everything transformed. The familiar landscape had become alien, all the landmarks obscured under white. Ray appeared at his door before Jesse had even dressed. Get your gear, the old man said. Today you learn winter. They spent that day and the next in learning how to navigate in snow, how to identify hazards hidden beneath the white surface, how to avoid avalanche-prone slopes, how to build emergency shelters from snow itself, how to recognize and treat the early stages of hypothermia and frostbite, how to find food when the land seemed dead and barren. It was during one of these expeditions that they found the first sign that Dalton had not given up his search. Boot prints, fresh, cut deep into the snow. 3 sets, moving in a search pattern through the forest about 2 miles from Ray's cabin. The searchers were being methodical, covering ground in overlapping sweeps. Ray knelt beside the tracks, his face grim. Mercer's men, looking for your body or looking for you. Either way, they're getting closer. What do we do? Jesse asked. We lead them away. Make them think you went in a different direction. Toward the valley, away from here. Ray stood brushing snow from his knees. And we prepare, because if they don't find what they're looking for, they'll expand their search. Eventually they'll find the cabin. Over the next days, they laid a careful trail. Ray created tracks that suggested Jesse had wandered north and west, away from their actual location. They planted evidence. A torn piece of cloth from Jesse's original hoodie caught on a branch. A makeshift camp that looked hastily abandoned. Small signs that would tell a story of a lost boy alone, moving randomly through the wilderness. But they also fortified. Ray revealed caches he had established over years. Food stores buried in waterproof containers. Tools and weapons hidden in hollow trees and concealed rock crevices. The old man had been preparing for this confrontation for 2 decades. Everything he had done, Jesse realized, had been leading to this moment. One evening, as they worked to camouflage a supply cache, Jesse asked the question that had been building in his mind. Ray, if you've been waiting for Dalton all this time, why didn't you just kill him? You had opportunities. You could have made it look like an accident, just like he did with Daniel. Ray was quiet for a long time, his hands continuing their work without pause. Because he said finally, that would make me the same as him. Killing a man in hot blood, In the moment, that's one thing. But cold-blooded murder, even for revenge, that changes you, poisons you. I've thought about it, God knows, dreamed about it, but I couldn't do it. And now, Jesse asked, with me here, does that change things? Ray looked at him, and Jesse saw something in the old man's eyes he hadn't seen before. Doubt. Maybe, Ray said, maybe having something to protect again, someone to protect, maybe that changes the equation. I don't know, boy. I honestly don't know. That night, Jesse lay in his shelter and listened to the wind moving through the pine branches, heavy now with snow. He thought about his father, Frank, who had hit his mother in a moment of rage, one moment that had destroyed a family. He thought about Dalton, who had killed a young man to protect a business deal. He thought about Ray, who had spent 25 years preparing for revenge, but couldn't pull the trigger when the moment came. Violence, Jesse was learning, was more complicated than he had imagined. It wasn't about being strong or weak. It was about choices, about lines you drew for yourself and whether you could live with crossing them. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, Jesse dreamed. He was running through the forest, but he was not alone. The pack ran with him, Gray in the lead. They were hunting something, though Jesse couldn't see what. The snow flew up around their feet. The cold air burned in his lungs, and he felt for the first time in his life that he belonged, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. He woke before dawn to the sound of howling. Close, very close. Jesse dressed quickly and stepped outside into the pre-dawn darkness. The pack was there, arranged in their semicircle as they had been that first night. But this time their body language was different. Alert, tense, warning. Gray stepped forward, his single eye fixed on Jesse. Then the alpha male turned and looked toward the east, toward the rising sun that had not yet cleared the peaks. He growled, low and threatening. Someone was coming. Jesse ran to Ray's cabin. The old man was already awake, already armed. He had his rifle, the 30-06 he kept for emergencies, and his face held an expression Jesse had never seen before. Not anger, not fear, something harder and colder. Resolve. They found us, Ray said. It wasn't a question. The wolves, Jesse said. They're warning us. Someone's coming from the east. Ray nodded slowly. Smart animals. Smarter than most people give them credit for. He handed Jesse a smaller rifle, a .22 that had belonged to Daniel. Not much stopping power, but you know how to use it. I taught you. Jesse took the rifle, feeling its weight. He had practiced with it, shooting at targets Ray set up. But targets were one thing. People were another. We're not looking to kill anyone, Ray said, as if reading his thoughts. We're looking to scare them off, make them understand this territory is defended. But if it comes to it, if they force our hand, you do what you have to do to survive. You understand? I understand, Jesse said. They moved into position, taking up spots Ray had scouted weeks before. Places with good visibility and covered approaches. Places where two people could hold off a larger force, at least temporarily. The snow was still falling, light but steady, making visibility poor beyond 50 yards. The waiting was the hardest part. Minutes stretched into hours. The sun climbed higher, though its light was diffused through the snow clouds. Jesse's fingers grew numb despite his gloves. His breath formed clouds that he worried would give away his position. Then he heard them. Voices, distant but drawing closer. 3 men moving carefully through the forest, following what might have been the false trail Ray had laid, or might have been pure chance bringing them in this direction. One of the voices was familiar. Colt, one of Dalton's guides. Jesse couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. Frustrated, tired, ready to be done with this search. Ray, concealed 20 yards to Jesse's left, raised his hand, the signal they had agreed upon. Hold position, don't engage unless engaged. The searchers came into view. Colt and Wade, the 2 guides from the original expedition, plus a 3rd man Jesse didn't recognize. Younger, harder looking, the kind of man who got paid for violence rather than wilderness skills. They were moving directly toward Ray's cabin. Jesse's heart hammered. If they found the cabin, they'd find evidence of recent habitation. They'd know someone was here. The search would intensify. More men would come. It would never end. Ray must have been thinking the same thing. The old man stood from his concealment, rifle raised but not quite aimed. The movement was enough. All 3 searchers froze. That's far enough, Ray called out. His voice carried authority honed by years as a ranger. "This is private property. You're trespassing." Colt recovered first, his hand moving toward the pistol at his hip. "We're looking for a lost boy. Jesse Hartwell. His uncle sent us. You seen him?" "I've seen you," Ray said. "Seen you trampling through my mountains for weeks now. And I'm telling you to leave. The boy's not here. Check your maps. You're on posted land." It was a bluff. This far into the wilderness, there were no property lines, no posted signs. But city people didn't always know that. For a moment, it seemed the bluff might work. Wade took a step backward, his body language suggesting retreat. But the third man, the one Jesse didn't recognize, was not convinced. He scanned the tree line, his eyes sharp and experienced. And those eyes locked on something, on movement where there should be none, on Jesse's position. "There!" the man shouted, pointing. "In the trees." Everything happened fast then. The man drew his weapon, a large caliber pistol. Ray swung his rifle around, not aiming at the man but firing a shot over his head. The crack of the gunfire was enormous in the quiet forest, echoing off the peaks. "Next one goes through you," Ray shouted. "Drop your weapons and leave." But the third man was already moving, taking cover behind a tree and returning fire. Not at Ray, but at Jesse's position. Bark exploded from the tree trunk beside Jesse's head. Instinct took over. Jesse dropped flat, his rifle clutched to his chest, his breath coming in gasps. More gunfire, the sharp reports of pistols, the deeper boom of Ray's rifle. Jesse couldn't see what was happening, could only hear the chaos of combat and smell the acrid scent of gunpowder. Then cutting through the noise, a different sound, howling. Not distant this time, but immediate, present, all around. The wolves had entered the fight. Jesse lifted his head enough to see. The pack, all 8 of them, had emerged from the forest. They weren't attacking, not yet. But they had positioned themselves in a loose ring around the searchers, cutting off escape routes. Their hackles were raised, their teeth were bared, and Gray, magnificent and terrible with his single eye, stood directly between the armed men and Jesse's position. The change in the searchers was immediate. Whatever bravado they'd had evaporated. Men could fight men. But this, a coordinated pack of wild wolves acting with clear purpose, this was beyond their experience. "We're leaving!" Wade shouted. "We're leaving right now!" The third man tried to maintain his position, tried to keep his weapon trained on Ray, but Gray took 2 steps forward and growled with a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. The man broke. All 3 of them broke, backing away slowly, then turning and running when they reached what they felt was a safe distance. The wolves did not pursue. They held their positions until the men were gone, until even the sound of their crashing retreat had faded. Then, one by one, they melted back into the forest. Gray was the last to leave. The alpha male looked at Jesse, then at Ray, then up at the sky as if consulting with powers invisible to human eyes. Then he too disappeared into the snow and shadow. Jesse and Ray remained in their positions for long minutes, neither speaking, both processing what had just happened. Finally, Ray stood and motioned for Jesse to approach. "That changes everything," the old man said when Jesse reached him. He didn't look happy about it. "Dalton's men will report this. Wolves defending human positions. Rangers will come to investigate. Or worse, hunters looking to eliminate a dangerous pack." "The wolves saved us," Jesse said. His voice was shaking, adrenaline still coursing through his system. "I know. And now they're at risk because of it." Ray's expression was grim. The natural world doesn't have mechanisms to protect animals that help humans. The law will see them as a threat. There'll be bounties. Permits to kill. Gray and his pack just painted targets on their backs. Jesse felt the weight of this crushing down on him. Everything came with a price. Every action had consequences. The wolves had protected him, and now they would be hunted for it. "What do we do?" Jesse asked. Ray looked at him for a long moment. "We do what we should have done from the start. We stop hiding. We go on offense. We take the fight to Dalton Mercer before he brings more violence to this mountain." "How?" Ray smiled, but it was a wolf's smile. Teeth and promise of blood. "We give him exactly what he wants. We give him you." The snow fell heavier now, transforming the Absaroka Mountains into a vast white cathedral where every sound was muffled and every landmark obscured. Jesse Hartwell crouched beside Ray Crowfoot in a shallow depression beneath an overhanging rock ledge, watching the valley below through a veil of falling snow. 3 days had passed since the confrontation with Dalton's men. 3 days since the wolves had intervened and changed everything. 3 days of waiting for the response they knew would come. Ray's plan was simple in concept but terrifying in execution. They would use Jesse as bait, let Dalton know the boy was alive, draw him out into the mountains, away from his lawyers and his money and his carefully constructed legitimacy. Out here, in the wilderness that Ray knew like the lines on his own palm, the playing field would be level. Out here, justice could be administered by older laws than those written in courtrooms. But first they needed to send a message, and that required reaching the outside world. The radio was old, a Forest Service emergency transceiver that Ray had maintained over the years in case he ever needed to call for help. He had never used it, not once in 25 years. But now he powered it up, the static hiss loud in the cold morning air, and found the frequency he needed. This is Raymond Crowfoot, former ranger station, Absaroka North. He paused, letting that sink in. To anyone listening, it would be like hearing from a ghost. I have Jesse Hartwell with me. The boy reported missing 3 weeks ago. He's alive, he's safe, and he has information about Dalton Mercer that needs to reach the authorities. Jesse sat beside him, his heart pounding. They had debated this approach for hours. Once they transmitted, there would be no going back. Dalton would know, the authorities would know, Jesse's mother would know. The machinery of the outside world would grind into motion, and whatever happened next would happen fast. Ray released the transmit button. The static returned. They waited. 1 minute. 2. Then a voice crackled through, professional but tinged with excitement. This is Ranger Station Delta, Raymond Crowfoot. Is that really you? We thought you were dead. Not yet, Ray replied. Though some have tried, I need you to relay a message to Sheriff Tom Daniels. Tell him I have evidence about the death of Daniel Crowfoot. Real evidence. And I have a witness to attempted kidnapping and fraud. But we're not coming in. Dalton Mercer needs to come to us. The ranger on the other end hesitated. Ray, that's not how this works. We need to send a team to extract you and the boy. Get statements. Do this properly. You send a team and Dalton will lawyer up before you get halfway here. Ray's voice was hard. No, this ends in the mountains. Tell Sheriff Daniels to pass a message to Dalton Mercer. The boy wants to make a deal, wants to sign over the Hartwell claim in exchange for safe passage home and no questions asked. Tell him to come to Caldwell Springs, alone. We'll meet him there in 3 days. Ray, the voice protested. That's insane. You can't just... 3 days, Ray repeated, and switched off the radio. The silence that followed felt immense. Jesse stared at the now silent device. That's it? That's the plan? You really think Dalton will come alone? Ray began packing the radio away. No, he'll bring men, armed men, professionals probably, men who know how to kill and how to make it look accidental. He looked at Jesse with those dark, knowing eyes. But he'll come. Men like Dalton can't resist. The chance to get what he wants, to tie up loose ends, to control the narrative. He'll convince himself he can manage it, that he's smarter than an old hermit and a scared kid. And then what happens? Jesse asked. Then we show him he's wrong. The next 3 days were spent in preparation. Ray revealed the full extent of the network he had built over 2 decades. Caches of supplies at strategic locations. Observation points with clear sightlines and covered approaches. Escape routes and fallback positions mapped and memorized. The old man had turned the mountains around Caldwell Springs into a fortress, and Jesse was about to learn why. Caldwell Springs itself was a natural amphitheater, a high valley ringed by steep ridges, with the springs emerging from a rock face at the valley's hood. The water was mineral-rich, slightly sulfurous, creating a pool that steamed even in winter. In the gold rush days, someone had built a small cabin near the springs, hoping to develop the site into a resort. That dream had died when the ore played out and the prospectors moved on. Now only ruins remained, stone foundations and collapsed walls slowly being reclaimed by the forest. Ray walked Jesse through the terrain, pointing out features that would matter in the coming confrontation. That ridgeline to the east, see how it's exposed? Anyone up there will be visible for 300 yards. But this western approach, it's all deadfall and heavy timber. You could move 20 men through there and never be seen from the valley floor. Jesse absorbed it all, his mind working to understand not just the geography, but the strategy behind Ray's observations. The old man was teaching him to think like a tactician, like someone who understood that battles were won before the first shot was fired, in the preparation and positioning. They set up what Ray called the theater, false signs of habitation in the old cabin ruins, a tent that looked hastily erected, a fire pit with fresh ashes, evidence that suggested Jesse was camping there, vulnerable and alone. But the reality was different. Their actual positions were in the rocks above the springs, with overlapping fields of fire and multiple escape routes. From there, they could see anyone approaching long before they themselves could be seen. On the second night, as they worked by moonlight to finalize their preparations, Jesse asked the question that had been bothering him. Ray, what if this goes wrong? What if someone gets killed? The old man continued his work, checking the action on his rifle. Someone probably will get killed, he said matter-of-factly. That's the nature of what we're doing. When you force a confrontation between men with guns and men willing to use them, blood usually follows. Jesse felt cold. I don't want to kill anyone. Ray looked at him then, and his expression was not unkind. I know you don't, boy. That's what makes you better than men like Dalton. But here's the truth. If it comes down to your life or theirs, you choose yours. Every time. No hesitation. You understand? I understand, Jesse said, though he wasn't sure he did. My son hesitated, Ray continued quietly. When Dalton pushed him, Daniel had time to react. Could have fought back. Could have grabbed Dalton and taken him over that cliff too. But Daniel was good, believed in law and order and proper procedures, believed even bad men deserved their day in court. He paused. That goodness got him killed. I won't let it kill you. The words hung in the cold air between them. Jesse thought about his father, Frank, whose moment of violence had destroyed his family. He thought about Dalton, whose calculated violence had ended a young man's life. He thought about Ray, whose restrained violence had kept him from becoming a murderer, but had also kept him from justice. Violence, Jesse was learning, was not a simple thing. It was a tool that could build or destroy, protect or devastate, depending on the hand that wielded it. On the morning of the third day, they took their positions before dawn. The snow had stopped, leaving the world crystalline and achingly beautiful. From their vantage point in the rocks, Jesse could see for miles. The valley spread below like a painting, all white in shadow and the dark verticals of pine trees. Steam rose from Caldwell Springs, creating an ethereal mist that drifted and swirled in the early light. Now we wait, Ray said. He had brought provisions for a long vigil. Water, dried meat, ammunition. The patience of a man who had learned to measure time in seasons rather than hours. They came at mid-morning. Jesse spotted them first, movement at the valley's eastern end, where an old mining road wound up from the lower elevations. Vehicles, 4 of them, moving in a convoy. They stopped at the end of the road where the terrain became too rough to drive, and men emerged. Jesse counted 8, all armed, all moving with the coordinated efficiency of military training. And in the center of the group, unmistakable even at distance, was Dalton Mercer. Ray watched through binoculars, his weathered face expressionless. Professional security. Former military, maybe law enforcement. Dalton's not taking chances. He lowered the binoculars. Makes sense. He thinks he's walking into an ambush. He's not wrong. Jesse felt his pulse quickening. What do we do? We wait. Let them come to us. Let them show their intentions. Dalton's group approached the ruins cautiously, weapons ready, spreading out in a tactical formation. They cleared the area systematically, checking the tent, the fire pit, the collapsed walls, finding no one. Jesse could see the frustration in their body language, the tension of armed men expecting combat but finding only an empty stage. Dalton called out, his voice carrying across the valley. Jesse, I know you're here. I got your message. I'm willing to deal. Come down and let's talk like reasonable people. Ray made a small gesture. Stay silent. Let him wonder. Minutes passed. Dalton tried again. Jesse, your mother is worried sick. She thinks you're dead. Whatever you think I did, whatever story you've concocted, we can work it out. I'm your family. I want to help. The lies came so smoothly, wrapped in concern and reasonableness. Jesse felt anger building in his chest, hot and righteous. This was the man who had hit him, who had planned to use him and then dispose of him, who had killed Ray's son and bought his way out of consequences. And here he stood, playing the role of concerned uncle with an audience of hired guns who didn't care about truth or justice, only their paychecks. Ray touched Jesse's arm, a wordless reminder. Patience. Wait for the right moment. Dalton conferred with his men. They began a search pattern, moving outward from the ruins. Two stayed with Dalton. The others spread out, checking the tree line, the approaches, looking for signs of habitation or ambush. They were thorough, professional. It was only a matter of time before they expanded their search to the rocks above the springs. That's when Ray made his move. He stood fully visible on the ridge, his rifle held loosely but ready. The reaction from Dalton's men was immediate. Weapons came up, shouted warnings, but Ray simply stood there, making no aggressive move, letting them see him. "Dalton Mercer," Ray called down. His voice carried authority that cut through the chaos. "It's been 25 years. Did you think I'd forgotten?" Even from this distance, Jesse could see the recognition hit Dalton, the color draining from his face. "Ray Crowfoot. I thought you were dead." "Disappointed, I imagine." Ray's voice was cold. "You murdered my son, pushed him off a cliff, and paid everyone to look the other way. But I didn't forget, and I didn't forgive." One of Dalton's security team was speaking urgently into a radio, calling for backup, probably. Or maybe just reporting the situation. Either way, it meant more complications were coming. "That's ancient history," Dalton shouted back. "And you can't prove anything. But I'm not here to debate the past. I'm here for the boy. Hand him over and I'll forget this ever happened." "The boy has something to say," Ray replied. "Jesse, tell him." Jesse stood, his leg is shaky, but his voice surprisingly steady. "I know about the Hartwell claim. I know what you were really after. And I know you killed Daniel Crowfoot to cover up your fraud." Dalton laughed, but it was forced. "You're a child, a disturbed child with an anxiety disorder. No one will believe a word you say." "Maybe not," Jesse said, "but they'll believe the recordings." It was a bluff. They had no recordings. But Dalton didn't know that. Jesse saw the uncertainty cross his uncle's face, saw the calculation happening behind his eyes, trying to determine if the boy was bluffing or if somehow, impossibly, there was evidence that could destroy him. "What recordings?" Dalton demanded. "The ones Daniel made before he died." Ray's voice was steady. "My son kept a journal, recorded conversations, took photographs. He was building a case against you. You knew it. That's why you killed him. But he was smart enough to hide copies, and I was smart enough to find them." Another bluff, but a more dangerous one. If Dalton believed it, he might panic, might do something rash. "You're lying," Dalton said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "Am I? Then why are you here with 8 armed men? Why not just bring the sheriff? Why not handle this legally?" Ray took a step forward, closer to the edge of the ridge. "Because you know what you are. You know what you've done. And you know that if a real investigation starts, if people start asking real questions, your entire empire falls apart." One of the security men was speaking urgently to Dalton. Jesse couldn't hear the words, but he could read the body language. They wanted to leave. This situation was deteriorating, becoming dangerous in ways they hadn't been paid enough to handle. But Dalton made a different choice. He drew a handgun from inside his jacket, and before anyone could react, he pointed it not at Ray or Jesse, but at the sky, and fired 3 rapid shots. It was a signal, and within seconds, Jesse understood what it meant. More men appeared from the tree line. 4 of them, moving fast, weapons ready. They had been held in reserve, waiting for exactly this moment. A trap within a trap. Ray swore and dropped back behind cover. Jesse followed, his heart hammering. They had been outmaneuvered. Dalton had anticipated their ambush and prepared a counter-ambush. Rounds began impacting the rocks around them. Not wild spray, but aimed fire from men who knew what they were doing. Chips of stone flew. The sharp crack of rifle shots echoed off the valley walls. Ray returned fire, not trying to hit anyone, but forcing them to keep their heads down. "We need to move," Ray shouted over the gunfire. "Fall back to position 2. They scrambled backward, using the terrain for cover, following a route Ray had prepared. Behind them, Jesse heard shouting. Dalton's men were advancing, emboldened now, sensing weakness. This was no longer a standoff. It was a hunt. They reached position 2, another cluster of boulders with good cover and clear sightlines. Ray took up position and began firing with careful precision, not shooting to kill, but targeting equipment. A radio exploded in one man's hand. A rifle was struck and sent spinning from another's grip. The old ranger was demonstrating skills honed over decades, making each shot count. But there were too many of them, and they were too well trained. They advanced using proper cover and fire techniques, one group laying down suppression while another moved forward. Military tactics. Overwhelming force. Jesse fired his .22, the small rifle almost useless at this range, but providing at least some covering fire. He was terrified. Every nerve in his body screamed to run. But Ray had taught him about fear, about how it could sharpen or paralyze depending on whether you fought against it or flowed with it. Jesse let the fear flow through him and kept shooting. Then cutting through to the chaos of gunfire, a sound that made every man in the valley freeze. Howling. The pack emerged from the forest like gray ghosts, 8 wolves moving with purpose and coordination that seemed almost supernatural. Gray in the lead, his single eye fixed on the advancing men, his scarred face pulled back in a snarl that showed every tooth. The change in Dalton's men was immediate. These were professionals, trained to handle human threats. But this, a pack of wild wolves attacking with clear intent, this was outside their experience, outside their training. One man broke and ran. A wolf, not Gray, but one of the younger males, ran him down in seconds. The man fell, screaming, trying to protect his throat as the wolf stood over him, snarling but not biting, just holding him there, pinned. Another man fired at the wolves, missed. Gray charged him, closing the distance in heartbeats. The man stumbled backward, fell, and then the alpha was on him. Again, not tearing his throat out as a wild animal might, but standing over him, jaws inches from his face, making the threat absolutely clear. It was not an attack, it was a demonstration. We can kill you, we choose not to, but only if you submit. Within minutes, 4 of Dalton's men were on the ground, wolves standing over them, the men frozen in terror. The others had retreated, including the reserve force. Only Dalton and 2 of his personal security remained standing, backing away slowly, weapons forgotten in the face of this primal threat. Ray stood from cover, his rifle aimed not at the wolves but at Dalton. "Call them off," Dalton shouted. "For God's sake, call them off." "They're not mine to call," Ray replied. "They're wild animals. Except they're not acting wild, are they? They're acting like they're protecting something, someone." Jesse emerged beside Ray. The wolves turned to look at him, and their demeanor changed instantly. Tails wagged slightly, ears came forward. Gray made a sound that was almost welcoming. Then the alpha male trotted to Jesse and, impossibly, pressed his massive head against the boy's leg. Jesse's hand, moving on instinct, found the thick fur behind Gray's ears. The wolf leaned into the touch like a dog might. And in that moment, every person in that valley understood something that defied explanation. The boy and the wolves were connected, bonded, pack. One of Dalton's security men, still standing, raised his rifle toward Gray. Jesse saw it happening as if in slow motion. Saw the barrel coming up, saw the finger moving toward the trigger. "No," Jesse shouted. Ray fired, not at the man, but at the rifle. The shot struck the weapon's stock, splintering wood and sending the gun flying from the man's hands. The man staggered back, clutching his bruised fingers, staring at Ray with wide eyes. "Next person who points a weapon at these animals gets it through the chest," Ray said. His voice was flat, absolute. "These wolves just saved your lives. Show some respect." Dalton seemed to be calculating, trying to find an angle, a way to regain control of the situation. "Jesse," he said, his voice taking on a pleading tone, "please be reasonable. Think about your mother. Think about your future. You don't belong in the wilderness with a crazy old man and a pack of wild animals. Come home. We'll work everything out." Jesse looked at his uncle, really looked at him, saw the desperation beneath the fake concern, saw the fear, saw a man who had spent his life manipulating and controlling, now facing a situation where his usual tools had no power. "I don't have a home with you," Jesse said. "You tried to use me. You hit me. You were going to kill me once you got what you wanted, just like you killed Daniel." "That's insane," Dalton protested. "I would never—" "You would," Jesse interrupted. "You did. And everyone here knows it. Your own men know it. They've seen who you really are." One of the security contractors on the ground, Wolf still standing over him, spoke up. "The kid's right." His voice was strained but clear. "We were told this was a recovery operation. Find a lost boy, bring him home. But that's not what this is. This is a hit. The suppressed weapons, the isolation, the deniability, we've been set up to be accessories to murder." "Shut up," Dalton snapped. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about." The man slowly, carefully, with the wolf watching his every move, pulled out his phone. "And I've been recording since we got here. Video, audio, everything. So whatever happens next, there's evidence." Dalton's face went through a series of expressions. Denial. rage, and finally calculation. He was trying to figure out damage control, trying to spin this into something he could survive. But Ray had other plans. He descended from his position, moving deliberately, his rifle never wavering from Dalton. When he reached the valley floor, the wolves parted for him, letting him pass. 25 years, Ray said, stopping 10 feet from Dalton. 25 years I've waited for this moment. Imagined it. Dreamed about it. What I'd say, what I'd do. Dalton's hand moved toward his holstered pistol. The wolves growled in unison, a sound that rumbled through the ground like distant thunder. Dalton's hand stopped, hovered, then dropped to his side. I thought I'd kill you, Ray continued. Thought that was the only justice possible. But my son wouldn't want that. Daniel believed in the law, believed in doing things right. So I'm going to honor that. He raised his voice so everyone could hear. Dalton Mercer, you're under citizen's arrest for the murder of Daniel Crowfoot, for attempted kidnapping, for fraud, and for conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent. You can't do this, Dalton said. But his voice had lost all its power. Just did. Ray reached for the zip tie cuffs he had brought. One of the security contractors who wasn't pinned by a wolf came forward. I'll help, the man said. He looked at his employer with disgust. I didn't sign up for this. Nobody did. Within minutes, Dalton was secured. His men, released by the wolves, were disarmed and gathered together. The contractor with the recording phone was already calling the authorities, explaining the situation in clipped professional terms. Sheriff incoming. Federal Rangers incoming. The machinery of justice, rusty and slow, but finally grinding into motion. Jesse sat on a rock, suddenly exhausted, as the adrenaline drained away. Gray lay beside him, the massive wolf's head resting on his paws, single eye half closed. The rest of the pack had retreated slightly, but remained visible, watching over their human packmate. Ray approached and sat beside Jesse. You did good, boy. Stayed calm, stayed smart. I was terrified, Jesse admitted. Fear's not the same as cowardice. You were scared and you acted anyway. That's courage. Ray was quiet for a moment. Your father would be proud. Jesse thought about Frank, his broken alcoholic father who had destroyed his marriage with violence, who had signed Jesse away to Dalton without really understanding what he was doing, who was probably in Seattle right now, drunk or wishing he was drunk, drowning in guilt and self-loathing. I need to call him, Jesse said. Need to let him know I'm alive. Ray nodded. When the Rangers get here, you can use their radio. But Jesse, there's something you need to understand. Going back, it won't be like coming here. The real world has different rules, different challenges. The strength you found here, you'll need to find a way to keep it there. I know, Jesse said. He did know. He could feel it already, the pull of civilization with its comforts and its suffocations. The soft bed and the hard expectations. The medication and the therapists and the well-meaning people who would try to turn him back into what he had been. But he wasn't that person anymore. Couldn't be, even if he wanted to. The wolves will miss you, Ray said quietly. I'll miss them too. Jesse's hand found Gray's fur, stroked the coarse coat. Will they be okay after this? Will Dalton's people come after them? Ray's expression darkened. That's a concern. Wolves that help humans, that attack humans even in defense, they get classified as dangerous. There'll be pressure to eliminate the pack. We can't let that happen, Jesse said fiercely. No, we can't. Ray smiled slightly. But that's a fight for another day. Today, you survived. You stood up to a bad man and won. That's enough for now. They sat in silence as the sun climbed higher, burning off the mist from the springs. In the distance, the sound of helicopter rotors began to echo off the peaks. The Rangers were coming, the sheriff was coming. Soon the valley would be full of officials and questions and procedures. But for this moment, Jesse just sat with Ray and the wolves, in the quiet beauty of the mountains that had nearly killed him and ultimately saved him. Gray lifted his head and looked at Jesse with that single penetrating eye. There was intelligence there, recognition, something that transcended the normal relationship between human and animal. The wolf stood, stretched, and then did something that took Jesse's breath away. Gray howled, not a warning or a threat, but something else. A song, a declaration. And one by one, the pack joined in, their voices rising and falling in harmonies that seemed older than words. Jesse found himself responding, not with human speech, but with sound from somewhere deeper. A howl that came from his chest, from his bones, from the wild thing inside him that the mountains had awakened. His voice joined theirs, became part of their song. And for that moment, he was not a 12-year-old boy from Seattle. He was pack. He was wolf. He was exactly what he needed to be. The howling faded. The wolves began to move away, melting into the forest. Gray was the last to go. The old alpha stopped at the tree line and looked back at Jesse one final time. It was a farewell. They both knew it. "Thank you," Jesse whispered, "for everything." Gray's tail swished once, then he was gone. The helicopters landed in the valley, rotors kicking up snow and steam from the springs. Men in uniforms emerged, weapons ready, expecting violence but finding only a strange tableau. An old man and a boy, a group of disarmed security contractors. And Dalton Mercer, restrained and defeated, all his money and power stripped away by mountains and wolves and the consequences of his own actions. Sheriff Tom Daniels was the first to reach Ray. He was a big man, weathered like the mountains themselves, with eyes that had seen too much but hadn't stopped caring. "Ray? Ray Crowfoot?" His voice was filled with disbelief. "We all thought you were dead." "Just waiting, Tom." Ray nodded toward Dalton. "That's the man who killed Daniel, and he tried to kill this boy. Dozens of witnesses, video evidence, and I'm ready to testify." The sheriff looked from Ray to Jesse to Dalton. His expression shifted from confusion to understanding to cold fury. "Get him on the helicopter. Separate custody from his men. I want statements from everyone." He turned to Ray. "You and the boy okay?" "Better than okay," Ray said. "We're ready to come home." Jesse wasn't sure that was true. Part of him wanted nothing more than to disappear back into the forest, to stay in the wilderness where things made sense, where fear could be faced and overcome, where the measure of a man was what he could do, not what he could buy. But another part understood that the real test was still ahead. Returning to civilization, facing his mother and his father and all the people who remembered him as weak and frightened, proving that the person he had become in these mountains was real and permanent, not just a temporary transformation that would fade when he left. The helicopter ride back to the ranger station was loud and disorienting. Jesse pressed against the window, watching the mountains recede, the vast wilderness becoming small and distant. Ray sat beside him, silent, his weathered face unreadable. When they landed, Jesse's mother was waiting. Megan Hartwell looked like she had aged 10 years in 3 weeks. Her face was drawn, her eyes red from crying. When she saw Jesse, she ran toward the helicopter before it had fully landed, before the Rangers could stop her. "Jesse!" she screamed. "Oh God, Jesse!" She pulled him into an embrace so tight he could barely breathe. Her body shook with sobs. "I thought you were dead. I thought I'd lost you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should never have let you go." Jesse hugged her back, feeling the love and the guilt and the complicated tangle of emotions that made up family. "Mom," he said, "I'm okay. I'm better than okay." She pulled back, looking at him, really looking at him for the first time, and Jesse saw the moment she realized he had changed. The softness in his face was gone, replaced by a leanness that made his features sharp. His body, though still short for his age, was no longer pudgy but compact and muscled. His eyes were different too, clearer, more focused. "What happened to you?" she whispered. "I grew up," Jesse said simply. The reunion with his father came later, after the initial statements and medical checks. Frank Hartwell arrived at the ranger station like a man walking to his own execution. He looked terrible. Unshaven, rumpled, eyes hollow with guilt and self-recrimination. When he saw Jesse, he stopped in the doorway as if afraid to come closer. "Jesse," Frank said. His voice broke. "I'm sorry. God, Jesse, I'm so sorry. I should have protected you. Should have known better. Should have been a better father." Jesse looked at the man who had given him life and then failed him in so many ways. The man who had taught him what not to be. And he realized something important. His father's failures had been necessary, had been part of the path that led Jesse to these mountains and to the person he was becoming. "It's okay, Dad," Jesse said, and meant it. "I'm okay." Frank crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled Jesse into a hug. The man smelled of sweat and fear and bourbon. But beneath that, Jesse detected something else, something that might have been hope. "I'm going to fix this," Frank said into Jesse's hair. "Going to fix me, going to be the father you deserve." Jesse didn't say what he was thinking, that it was too late for his father to make him into anything, that the mountains and Ray and the wolves had already done that work. But maybe it wasn't too late for Frank to become something better. Maybe everyone deserved the chance that Jesse had been given, the chance to be broken down and rebuilt into something stronger. The legal proceedings moved slowly but inexorably. Dalton's men turned on him, providing testimony in exchange for reduced charges. The video evidence was damning. Most importantly, the investigation into Daniel Crowfoot's death was reopened, and with adult eyes looking at evidence that had been buried by money, the truth became obvious. Dalton Mercer was charged with second-degree murder, attempted kidnapping, fraud, and conspiracy. His energy company collapsed as investors fled. His carefully constructed empire disintegrated. For Jesse, the aftermath was complicated. His mother wanted to take him home to Seattle immediately, wrap him in bubble wrap and never let him out of her sight. But Jesse refused. He needed to return to the mountains, needed to say a proper goodbye, needed to make sure the wolves were protected. Ray intervened, speaking to Megan with the authority of someone who had saved her son's life. The boy's not the same person who left Seattle. You try to force him back into that life, you'll lose him forever. He needs time, needs to transition slowly. Eventually, they reached a compromise. Jesse would spend another month in the mountains with Ray, helping him prepare for winter, securing the cabin, and most importantly, working with wildlife officials to ensure the wolf pack was protected rather than eliminated. Only then would he return to Seattle for the winter, with the understanding that he could come back to the mountains in the spring. Winter came to the Absaroka Mountains with a vengeance that even Ray Crowfoot admitted was unusual. The first true blizzard hit during Jesse Hartwell's second week back in the wilderness, burying the world under 3 feet of snow in a single night. Jesse woke in his cabin to a silence so complete it felt like the earth had stopped breathing. When he pushed open his door, a wall of white collapsed inward, and he understood that the easy part of his mountain education was over. Ray appeared an hour later, moving through the deep snow with the ease of someone who had done this for decades. The old man's face was grim as he surveyed the transformed landscape. This is the real test, boy. Summer survival is child's play. Winter is when the mountains separate the living from the dead. They spent that day and the next digging out, creating paths between their cabins and the supply caches, reinforcing shelters against the weight of snow and the bite of wind that howled down from the peaks like something alive and hungry. Jesse's hands, despite their calluses, cracked and bled in the cold. His lungs burned with every breath of air so frigid it felt like inhaling knives. But he didn't complain, didn't ask for relief. He had made a promise to himself during that confrontation with Dalton. He would never be weak again, never be the soft city boy who needed pills to face the day. Whatever the mountains demanded, he would give. On the 4th night after the blizzard, Ray shared his fire and his evening meal, a stew made from elk meat and root vegetables they had stored in the underground cache. The old man was quieter than usual, his dark eyes distant, as if seeing through the cabin walls to something beyond. "There's something I need to tell you," Ray said finally, "about why I really stayed in these mountains all these years." Jesse set down his bowl, sensing the weight of what was coming. "After Daniel died, after the investigation cleared Dalton, I went to a dark place." Ray's voice was low, measured. "Started drinking. Started thinking about eating my gun. One night, drunk and angry and broken, I came up here planning to do it, end things where my son had died." Ray stood and moved to the window, looking out at the darkness beyond. But something happened. I was sitting on that cliff where Daniel fell, gun in my mouth, ready to pull the trigger. And I heard wolves, a whole pack of them, singing in the valley below. It was Gray's pack, though Gray was young then, not yet the alpha. They sang for hours. And somewhere in that song, I heard something that made me take the gun out of my mouth. "What did you hear?" Jesse asked quietly. "Purpose." Ray turned back to face him. "Those wolves didn't know I was there, didn't care about my pain or my loss. They were just living, surviving, being what they were meant to be. And I realized that was what Daniel would have wanted for me. Not revenge, not death, just to keep living, to keep protecting these mountains like he had tried to do." Jesse felt the weight of this revelation. "You stayed for the wolves. I stayed for a lot of reasons. The wolves were one. Waiting for Dalton to return was another. But mostly Ray's voice grew softer. I stayed because I was afraid. Afraid to go back to the world where my son had died and his killer walked free. Afraid I'd become the kind of man who could put a bullet in another man's head. Up here, I could be alone, be safe, be something other than broken. But you're not broken, Jesse said. Ray's smile was sad. We're all broken, boy. Every single one of us. The question is what we do with the pieces. Some people let them cut them to ribbons from the inside. Others use them to build something new, something stronger, because it had to be rebuilt. The wind howled outside, rattling the cabin's walls. Jesse thought about his own brokenness, the anxiety that had crippled him, the fear that had made him invisible, the weakness that had let Dalton use him. All of it was still there, would always be there, but now he had learned to carry it differently. What do you think Daniel would say, Jesse asked, if he could see you now? See what you've done? Ray was quiet for a long time. I think he'd be proud. Not of the revenge I wanted, but of the fact that I waited, did it right, made sure justice was served properly, even though it took 25 years. He paused, and I think he'd be grateful for you. For me, you gave me someone to protect again, someone to teach, someone to pass on what I learned from Daniel and his mother and her people. Ray met Jesse's eyes. You gave me a reason to be more than just a ghost waiting for his revenge. That night, Jesse lay in his sleeping bag thinking about purpose, about how people found reasons to keep living when everything seemed lost, about how the mountains could be both destroyer and savior, depending on whether you fought them or learned from them. Sleep came slowly, and with it, dreams. He was running with the pack again, Gray in the lead, snow flying up around their paws. But this time they were running towards something rather than away, a bright point of light in the distance that Jesse couldn't identify, but knew was important, necessary. Home. He woke to Ray pounding on his door. Jesse, get up. We've got trouble. Jesse dressed in seconds and emerged into the pre-dawn darkness. Ray was already moving, following tracks in the snow that even Jesse could identify. Human tracks, boot prints, multiple sets, leading toward the valley where they had confronted Dalton. Hunters, Ray said. His voice was tight with controlled anger. Came in during the night. Professional outfit. Wolf hunters. Jesse felt ice in his stomach that had nothing to do with the temperature. But the investigation cleared the pack. The wildlife officials said they were protected. Official protection means nothing to some people. Ray's jaw was set. There's a bounty on wolves in 3 counties around here. Legal loopholes, private landowner rights, gray areas that men exploit when they want something dead. We have to stop them, Jesse said. Ray nodded, but carefully. These aren't Dalton's corporate security. These are backwoods hunters who know these mountains as well as I do, maybe better. They followed the tracks through the darkness, moving as quickly as safety allowed. The hunters had a several-hour head start, but they were traveling heavy, with equipment that left deep impressions in the snow. Traps, snares, poison bait, the full arsenal of men who killed predators for sport and profit. As the sun rose, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, Ray and Jesse reached a ridge overlooking the valley. Below, they could see the hunting party. 5 men setting up a killing ground near the frozen creek where Jesse had seen the pack drinking weeks before. They're using illegal bait, Ray said, studying the scene through binoculars. Dead livestock laced with poison. Any wolf that feeds will die in agony. He lowered the binoculars, his face carved from stone. And they've got traps. The kind with serrated jaws that don't kill, just hold. Wolves caught in those will chew their own legs off trying to escape. We need to warn the pack, Jesse said. Can we find them? Ray looked at him. Boy, we don't find the pack. They find us. Or they don't. We can't control what wild animals do. But they're in danger. They saved our lives. And now we save theirs if we can. But Jesse, listen to me. Ray gripped his shoulder. Those men down there are armed. They're on land they've paid to hunt. Technically, they're not breaking any laws except the poison, which they'll deny using. If we interfere directly, we're the ones who end up arrested or worse. Then what do? We do what the mountains taught us. We think, we plan, we use the terrain against them. Over the next hours, Ray and Jesse implemented a strategy that was part sabotage, part misdirection, and part prayer. They circled wide around the hunter's position and began dismantling their trap line. Each steel trap they found was carefully sprung and buried in snow. Each bait station was scattered, the poisoned meat buried deep where no animal would find it. It was dangerous work. Several times they came close to being spotted. Once Jesse slipped and nearly fell into a concealed trap himself, saved only by Ray's quick hand pulling him back. But they were persistent, methodical. By midday, they had neutralized most of the hunters' preparations. But most wasn't all. And as they worked, Jesse heard something that made his blood run cold. The distant sound of wolves howling. Close. Too close. The hunters heard it too. Jesse watched through the binoculars as the men grabbed their rifles and moved with practiced efficiency toward the sound. These were not amateurs. These were men who had killed dozens, maybe hundreds of wolves. Men who knew exactly how to respond to a pack's presence. Ray made a decision that Jesse would remember for the rest of his life. The old man stood from their concealment, cupped his hands around his mouth, and howled. It was not a human imitation of a wolf call. It was something deeper, older, a sound that Ray had learned from his mother's people, a call that was meant to warn and confuse. The effect was immediate. The hunters stopped, looking back toward Ray's position, uncertain whether they had heard a wolf or something else. And in that moment of hesitation, the actual wolf howls changed direction, moving away, retreating deeper into the safety of the high country. But the distraction had cost them. The hunters spotted movement on the ridge where Ray and Jesse were positioned. Shouts, raised rifles, the crack of gunshots that echoed like thunder off the mountain walls. "Run!" Ray shouted. "Jesse, run!" They ran, plunging through deep snow, using every trick Ray had taught Jesse about moving through difficult terrain. Behind them, the hunters gave chase, their shouts growing closer. These men knew the mountains, knew how to track, knew that two targets fleeing through deep snow would tire quickly. Ray led them through a maze of fallen timber and rock outcroppings, following a route he had prepared in his mind years before. Always have an escape plan, he had taught Jesse. Always know 3 ways out of any situation. They reached a narrow canyon where the snow had drifted deep, nearly 8 feet in places. Ray didn't hesitate. He plunged in and Jesse followed, the snow swallowing them to their chests. It was like swimming through freezing quicksand. Every step required enormous effort. Jesse's lungs burned, his legs screamed, but he kept moving because stopping meant death. Behind them, the hunters reached the canyon's mouth. Jesse heard their voices, loud and confident. They had their prey cornered, trapped. This was over. Then the mountain itself seemed to speak, a low rumble, growing louder. Jesse looked up and saw it. The entire snowfield above them, destabilized by the gunshots and the vibration of their passage, was moving, sliding, accelerating. Avalanche. Ray grabbed Jesse and threw both of them against the canyon wall, into a small alcove barely large enough for 2 bodies. The wall of snow hit them with the force of a freight train. The world became white and roaring and crushing. Jesse couldn't breathe, couldn't see, couldn't do anything but press himself against the rock and pray. It lasted maybe 30 seconds, maybe an hour. Time lost meaning in the chaos. When it finally stopped, Jesse and Ray were buried to their necks but alive. The alcove had protected them from the worst of it. The hunters had not been so fortunate. As Ray and Jesse dug themselves out, they could hear the screams. Men buried under tons of snow, trapped, dying. The avalanche had swept through the canyon like the fist of an angry god, and 3 of the 5 hunters had been caught in its path. Ray moved without hesitation, pulling the avalanche beacon from his pack. Even now, even after everything, he was a ranger first. He began searching for the buried men, following the signal, digging frantically through the snow. Jesse helped, his hands numb, his mind reeling. This was death on a scale he hadn't truly comprehended. Not the abstract death of Dalton's planned murder, or even the potential death of a gunfight. This was immediate and total and arbitrary. The mountain had judged, and 3 men were paying the price. They found the first hunter after 10 minutes of digging. He was unconscious but alive, his face blue from lack of oxygen. Ray performed rescue breathing while Jesse continued digging out the man's chest and torso. When the hunter finally gasped and coughed, spitting up snow and bile, his eyes opened and locked on Ray. "You saved me," the man rasped. "Just doing what's right," Ray replied, "even for men who do wrong." The second hunter they found was already dead. His neck had been broken by the force of the avalanche, his body twisted at an angle that made Jesse turn away and retch into the snow. This was not the clean death of movies or video games. This was brutal and ugly and real. The third hunter they found alive but badly injured. His legs were crushed, bones visible through torn clothing. He was conscious, which made it worse. His screams echoed off the canyon walls as Ray tried to stabilize him with the limited first aid supplies they carried. The two hunters who had avoided the avalanche had run for help. Ray used his emergency radio to call for rescue, knowing it would bring authorities and questions and complications. But none of that mattered. Lives were at stake. While they waited for the helicopter, the hunter with the crushed legs, his face gray with shock and pain, looked at Ray with eyes that held a terrible clarity. Why, he gasped. Why save us? We were hunting wolves. You love those animals. Ray was quiet for a moment, his hands working to keep pressure on the worst of the bleeding. Because that's what separates us from animals, he said finally. Animals kill for food or territory or survival. Humans can choose mercy, can choose to save even our enemies. That's what makes us human. The hunter closed his eyes. Tears leaked from beneath the lids, mixing with the snow on his face. I'm sorry. God, I'm sorry. I just needed the money. Bounty on wolves pays better than anything else out here. Jesse knelt beside the man, taking his hand. The hunter's grip was weak but desperate. You're going to be okay, Jesse said, not knowing if it was true. Help is coming. The kid, the hunter said, his eyes opening to look at Jesse. You're the Hartwell boy, the one who survived. Yeah, Jesse said. The mountains made you strong, didn't they? It wasn't a question. You've got that look, the wolf look, like you belong here. I guess they did, Jesse replied. The helicopter arrived 20 minutes later, lowering a rescue basket. The injured hunters were evacuated first, then the dead hunter's body. Ray and Jesse were last, climbing into the helicopter as the sun began to set behind the western peaks, painting the snow in shades of crimson and gold. The pilot, a grizzled veteran of mountain rescues, looked at Ray with something like recognition. Ray Crowfoot, he said. Heard you were back. Heard about what happened with Mercer, too. The pilot extended his hand. Name's Peterson. Flew rescue missions with your son Daniel. Hell of a man. Ray took the hand, his weathered face showing emotion for the first time since the avalanche. Thank you. Daniel would have liked knowing you remember him. The flight back to the ranger station took an hour. Jesse pressed his face to the window, watching the mountains recede, the vast wilderness becoming small and manageable from altitude. But he knew better now. Knew that the mountains were never small, never manageable. They simply allowed humans to exist within them, and that permission could be revoked at any moment. At the ranger station, they were met by Sheriff Tom Daniels and a woman Jesse didn't recognize. She was in her 40s, professional looking even in winter gear, with a federal badge visible on her jacket. FBI. Mr. Crowfoot, Jesse Hartwell, the woman said. I'm Special Agent Sarah Chen. I need to ask you both some questions about what happened today. The interrogation, for that's what it was despite Agent Chen's professional courtesy, lasted 3 hours. They went over every detail, why they were in that area, what they had been doing, whether they had deliberately triggered the avalanche, whether they had been interfering with a legal hunting operation. Ray answered everything with calm precision. We were protecting wildlife that had been instrumental in apprehending a wanted criminal. The hunters were using illegal poison bait, which I have photographs of. When they opened fire on us, we fled. The avalanche was an act of nature, not sabotage. Agent Chen studied him. You're very well prepared with answers, Mr. Crowfoot. I've had 25 years to think about right and wrong, Ray replied. I know the difference. Eventually, they were released. No charges filed, though Agent Chen made it clear they were still investigating. As they left the interrogation room, Sheriff Daniels pulled them aside. Officially, I have to tell you to stay away from that area, he said. Let us handle the wolf situation through proper channels. But the sheriff's eyes said something different. Unofficially, those hunters have been causing problems for months. They've got no respect for protected species or land boundaries. What happened today might just convince them to hunt elsewhere. The wolves, Jesse asked, are they safe now? The sheriff glanced at Agent Chen's retreating back, then leaned closer. The pack hasn't been seen since the avalanche. Wildlife officials think they've moved to higher ground, deeper into the wilderness. They're probably safer now than they've been in years, he paused. Thanks to you. That night, Ray and Jesse sat in the ranger station's cafeteria, eating hot food and drinking coffee that tasted like heaven after the day they'd had. Frank Hartwell arrived near midnight, having driven from Seattle the moment he heard about the avalanche. He looked haggard, terrified, and completely sober. Jesse, Frank said, pulling his son into a crushing embrace. I can't keep doing this. Can't keep almost losing you. His voice broke. I can't survive it. Jesse hugged his father back, smelling the coffee on his breath instead of the alcohol. It's okay, Dad. I'm okay. Frank pulled back, gripping Jesse's shoulders. When this is over, when you come home, things are going to be different. I'm different. Been sober 47 days now. Got a sponsor, going to meetings, trying to figure out how to be the father I should have been from the start. Jesse looked at his father and saw something he hadn't seen in years. Hope. Real, fragile, hard-fought hope. That's good, Dad. I'm proud of you. Frank's eyes filled with tears. I'm proud of you too, son. So damn proud. They stayed at the ranger station for another week while the investigation concluded and the weather cleared. During that time, Jesse spent hours with wildlife officials, explaining what he had observed about the wolf pack, their intelligence, their social structure, the way they had deliberately protected humans who had shown them kindness. The officials listened with varying degrees of skepticism. But when Jesse showed them the video he had recorded on his phone, footage of Gray and the pack standing over Dalton's men without attacking, of the wolves responding to Jesse's presence with recognition and trust, the skepticism began to fade. Dr. Ellen Martinez, the lead wildlife biologist, studied the footage with fascination. This is unprecedented, she said. Wolves don't form bonds with humans like this. Not wild wolves. Not in contemporary times. Ray, sitting nearby, spoke quietly. My mother's people have stories about wolves and humans living in harmony, hunting together, protecting each other. Those stories are thousands of years old. Maybe we're just rediscovering something we forgot. Dr. Martinez looked at him. You think this boy has some kind of special connection? I think the mountains choose who they choose. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get to witness something that reminds us we're not as separate from nature as we like to believe. On Jesse's last day in the mountains before returning to Seattle for the winter, Ray took him on one final hike. They traveled light without weapons or heavy packs, moving through the forest as morning fog drifted between the trees like ghosts. They climbed to a high ridge Jesse had never visited, a place where the view stretched for 100 miles in every direction. Mountains upon mountains, vast and eternal and indifferent to human concerns. Ray stood at the edge and was silent for a long time. When my son died, Ray said finally, I thought my life was over, thought there was nothing left worth living for. But these mountains taught me different. They taught me that life keeps going whether we're ready or not, that new things grow from old grief, that purpose can be found even in the darkest places. He turned to Jesse. You came here broken, used, discarded like you didn't matter, and the mountains took you and made you into something the men who hurt you could never have imagined. That's not magic, boy. That's just what happens when someone refuses to quit. When someone decides their story isn't over just because someone else tried to end it. Jesse felt tears on his cheeks, cold in the mountain air. Thank you, he said, for everything, for saving me, for teaching me, for being what I needed when I needed it. You saved yourself, Ray replied. I just showed you where to look for the tools. They stood together in silence. Two people who had found each other when both had needed finding. And then, from the valley below came a sound that made them both smile. Howling. The pack song, distant but clear, carried on the wind like a blessing. Gray, Jesse whispered. Still alive, Ray said. Still wild, still free. That's all we can ask for in this life. To stay alive, stay wild, stay free for as long as the mountains allow. The return to Seattle was harder than Jesse had imagined. The city felt alien now, too loud and too soft all at once. The constant noise of traffic and voices and electronic devices pressed against his ears like physical pain. The heated buildings felt suffocating. The abundance of food and water and safety felt wrong somehow, unearned. His mother tried to smooth his transition, understanding in ways she hadn't before that her son had changed fundamentally. She didn't push medication, didn't insist on intensive therapy, didn't try to force him back into the mold of who he had been. But school was a battlefield. Jesse returned to find himself a celebrity of sorts, the boy who had survived abandonment in the wilderness, who had helped catch a murderer, who had wolves as allies. Some kids were awed, others were threatened. The bullies who had tormented him before didn't dare approach him directly, but they found other ways to make his life difficult. Jesse endured it with a patience he had learned from the mountains. Let them talk, let them whisper, let them try to diminish what he had become. Words were just noise, and he had learned to filter noise. The real challenge came at night, alone in his room. The soft bed felt wrong. The walls felt close. He found himself sleeping on the floor with the window open, needing to hear wind and rain and the sounds of the world beyond human construction. His mother found him like that one morning and didn't scold. She just brought him a sleeping bag, the one Ray had sent home with him, and told him it was okay to need what he needed. Frank kept his promise. He stayed sober, attended his meetings, started rebuilding his relationship with Jesse one awkward conversation at a time. They went on hikes together in the Cascades, short day trips that were nothing like the Absaroka wilderness, but were something, a start, a foundation to build on. On Christmas Eve, a package arrived. No return address, but Jesse knew immediately who it was from. Inside was a carving expertly done, showing a boy and a wolf standing side by side on a mountain ridge. Beneath it, carved in small letters, Pack. Jesse set it on his desk where he could see it every morning when he woke. A reminder of who he had become, who he was still becoming. The mountains had made him strong, but the real test was carrying that strength into the soft world, was staying wild in a place that wanted to domesticate everything, was remembering that he was Pack, even when the pack was 500 miles away. Spring came slowly to Seattle. The rains gave way to tentative sunshine. Cherry blossoms bloomed and fell. And as the days lengthened and warmed, Jesse felt the pull growing stronger. The mountains were calling, Ray was calling, the pack was calling. His mother saw it in him, that restlessness, that hunger for something the city couldn't provide. One evening in late April, she sat with him on their apartment balcony, looking out at the distant mountains barely visible through the urban haze. "You need to go back," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," Jesse admitted. "I do." Megan nodded slowly. "Your father and I have been talking. We've decided to let you spend summers in Montana. With Ray. Learning. Growing. Being whoever you need to be." She looked at him, and Jesse saw acceptance in her eyes. "You're not like other kids, Jesse. Maybe you never were. The mountains showed you that. Trying to force you to be normal would just break you again." "Thank you, Mom," Jesse said, his throat tight. "But you finish the school year first. You maintain your grades. You prove you can balance both worlds, the wild one and this one. Can you do that?" Jesse thought about the discipline Ray had taught him, the patience, the ability to endure discomfort in service of a larger goal. "Yeah," he said, "I can do that." The last month of school was different. Jesse walked the halls, knowing he had a timer counting down to freedom. Every class, every test, every social interaction was just something to endure before he could return to where he belonged. But he did more than endure. He excelled, proved that the strength he had found in the wilderness could be applied anywhere, to anything. On the last day of school, as Jesse cleaned out his locker, one of his old bullies approached. The kid looked different, smaller somehow, though he hadn't physically changed. He shifted his weight nervously before speaking. "Hey, Hartwell," the kid's voice was uncertain. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, for being a dick. You're actually pretty cool." Jesse looked at him, saw a kid who was also trying to figure out who he was, who was also carrying weight and fear and uncertainty, just manifesting it differently. "Thanks," Jesse said, and meant it. The drive back to Montana took 2 days. Frank drove, having rented a truck large enough to carry supplies for the summer. They talked more on that drive than they had in years. About Frank's recovery, about Jesse's plans, about Megan, and whether the marriage could be salvaged or if some things, once broken, stayed broken. "I don't know if your mother and I will get back together," Frank admitted as they crossed into Montana. "But I know I want to be in your life. Want to be someone you can count on." He paused. "Maybe I could come visit sometimes. Learn some of what you've learned." Jesse considered this. The idea of his father in the wilderness, learning from Ray, facing the same tests Jesse had faced. It could destroy him, or it could save him. "I'd like that, Dad," Jesse said. They reached the ranger station at dusk on the second day. Ray was waiting, looking exactly as Jesse remembered. Weathered, solid, real in a way few things in Seattle had felt. The old man smiled when he saw Jesse emerge from the truck. "Welcome home, boy," Ray said. And Jesse realized that's exactly what it was. Home. Not the apartment in Seattle, not the school or the streets, or any of the places he had spent the first 12 years of his life. This, the mountains, the wilderness, the place where he had died and been reborn into something stronger. They spent that first night at Ray's cabin, catching up, making plans for the summer. Jesse had grown another 2 inches over the winter. His voice had started to change, but the most important changes were invisible. The confidence, the self-possession, the quiet strength that needed no announcement. The next morning, they hiked into the high country, toward the territories where the pack roamed. Jesse didn't know if he would see them, didn't know if Gray had survived the winter, didn't know if the wolves would remember him or care. But as they crested a familiar ridge and looked down into the valley below, Jesse saw them. 8 wolves, including 3 juveniles who had grown since he last saw them. And at their head, unmistakable even at distance, was Gray. The alpha male stood on a rock outcropping, his single eye scanning the terrain. And then, as if sensing something, Gray turned and looked directly at where Jesse stood. For a moment, neither moved. Boy and wolf, separated by hundreds of yards in everything that made them different species. Then Gray threw back his head and howled. Not a warning, not a hunt call, something else. Recognition. Welcome. Without thinking, Jesse responded. His howl was stronger now, deeper, more confident than it had been months before. His voice joined Gray's, and then the whole pack joined in, their song filling the valley with world primal music. Ray stood beside him, silent, a slight smile on his weathered face. They remember, the old man said. Jesse felt something shift inside his chest, a piece of himself that had been missing, clicking into place. Yeah, he said, and I remember them. The summer stretched ahead, full of lessons to learn and challenges to face. The mountains were still dangerous, still unforgiving, still ready to kill anyone who grew careless or weak. But Jesse was no longer afraid. He was pack. He was wild. He was exactly where he belonged. And somewhere in the high country, a wolf with one eye watched over a boy who had learned what it meant to survive, what it meant to be strong, what it meant to be free. 2 years had passed since Jesse Hartwell first stumbled into Ray Crowfoot's clearing, half dead and completely broken. Now, at 14, he stood on the summit of Caldwell Peak, the highest point in the Absaroka Range, and watched the sun rise over mountains that had become more home than any building ever could. His body had transformed completely. He was still short for his age, probably always would be, but every inch of him was lean muscle and coiled strength. His hands bore the permanent calluses of someone who worked with wood and stone and earth. His face had lost all traces of boyhood softness, weathered by sun and wind into something harder and more defined. But the biggest changes were invisible. The anxiety that had once crippled him still existed, would always exist, but now it was just information, data. His nervous system provided that he could evaluate and act on or dismiss as needed. The fear that had made him small had been replaced by respect. Respect for the mountains, for the wolves, for the raw power of nature that could kill him in 1,000 ways if he grew careless. And that respect had made him careful, deliberate, strong. Ray appeared beside him, moving with the silence that still impressed Jesse even after hundreds of hours learning to do the same. The old man was slower now, his movements just slightly more cautious, his breathing just slightly more labored at altitude. 73 years old and still living alone in the wilderness. Still teaching. Still watching over the mountains that had saved him 3 decades before. Beautiful morning, Ray said. His voice was quieter these days, as if he was conserving energy for what mattered. Good day for what we have to do. Jesse nodded. Today was important. Today would determine the future of these mountains, of the wolf pack, of everything they had fought for. Dalton Mercer's trial had concluded 3 weeks ago. Guilty on all counts. Second-degree murder for Daniel Crowfoot's death. Attempted kidnapping. Fraud. Conspiracy. He would spend the rest of his life in prison, his empire dismantled, his name synonymous with corruption and violence. But the legal victory had created a new problem. The Hartwell claim, the 5,000 acres that included Caldwell Springs and the territories where the Wolfpack denned, was now legally Jesse's. A 14-year-old boy owned land worth millions, and every developer, mining company, and energy corporation in 3 states wanted to buy it from him. The letters came daily, the phone calls were constant, the pressure was immense. Today, Jesse would make his decision public, and that decision would change everything. They descended from the summit as the sun climbed higher, following trails that Jesse now knew by heart. Every rock, Every tree, every subtle variation in terrain was mapped in his mind. He could navigate these mountains in darkness or blinding snow, could find water and shelter and food in landscapes that looked barren to untrained eyes. Ray had taught him well. But more than that, the mountains themselves had taught him, had tested him season after season until survival became not just possible but natural. At Ray's cabin, they found Frank Hartwell waiting. Jesse's father had made the trip from Seattle, where he now worked as a counselor at a recovery center, helping other men find the sobriety that had saved his own life. 2 years sober, 2 years of slow, painful reconstruction of the man he should have been all along. He looked healthier than Jesse had ever seen him, clear-eyed, purposeful, present. "Son," Frank said, embracing Jesse, "big day." "Yeah," Jesse replied. "You ready for this?" Frank smiled, but there was nervousness beneath it. "As ready as I'll ever be. Public speaking isn't exactly my strong suit. But for this, for you, I'll do it." They loaded the truck with equipment and drove to the ranger station, where a crowd had already gathered. Media, environmental groups, indigenous rights activists, government officials, representatives from the corporations who wanted to buy the land. It seemed like everyone in Montana had an opinion about what should happen to the Hartwell claim. Sheriff Tom Daniels met them at the entrance, his weathered face showing approval. "Hell of a turnout. Whatever you decide today, it's going to make waves." "That's the idea," Jesse said. Inside the ranger station's main hall, a podium had been set up, chairs filled with people who would shape the narrative of whatever happened next. Jesse scanned the crowd and saw faces he recognized. Dr. Ellen Martinez, the wildlife biologist who had studied the wolf pack. Special Agent Sarah Chen, whose investigation had helped convict Dalton. Members of the Crow Nation, Ray's mother's people, who had a stake in how this sacred land would be used. And in the back, trying to be inconspicuous, Jesse spotted 3 men in expensive suits. Lawyers for North Star Energy, one of the corporations that had offered $20 million for the land and the water rights beneath it. They were here to make a final pitch, to convince a 14-year-old boy that money was more important than mountains. Ray noticed them too. His jaw tightened. "They don't give up easy." "They're about to," Jesse said. The presentation began with Sheriff Daniels providing context. The history of the Hartwell claim, the legal battles spanning generations, the murder of Daniel Crowfoot, and the decades-long quest for justice, the recent conviction of Dalton Mercer. And finally, the question that brought them all here. What would happen to the land now that ownership was finally settled? Then it was Jesse's turn. He approached the podium, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. 2 years ago, this would have paralyzed him. The anxiety would have been overwhelming. But he had faced grizzly bears and winter storms and armed men. He had run with wolves and learned to survive in conditions that killed the unprepared. A room full of people was nothing. "My name is Jesse Hartwell," he began. His voice was steady, clear. 2 years ago, I was a different person. I was weak, scared, medicated. I let people use me because I didn't think I had value. Then I was abandoned in these mountains, left to die by a man who saw me as nothing more than a signature on a piece of paper. The room was silent. Even the lawyers in the back were listening. But I didn't die. These mountains wouldn't let me, and neither would the people and animals who live here. Ray Crowfoot taught me how to survive, how to be strong, how to understand that weakness isn't permanent unless you accept it. And the wolves, he paused, Gray's pack, they taught me what it means to belong, what it means to be part of something larger than yourself. Jesse pulled out a folder and opened it. Inside were the documents that proved his ownership of the Hartwell claim. 5,000 acres of pristine wilderness, water rights worth fortunes, timber and mineral rights that corporations would kill for. His signature on these papers could make him wealthy beyond imagination. "I've received a lot of offers for this land," Jesse continued. $20 million, $30 million. One company offered $40 million and a percentage of future profits. They showed me charts and graphs about economic development, about jobs and progress, and making the world better through hydroelectric power and resource extraction. The North Star lawyers were leaning forward now, hopeful. "And I'm sure they believe what they're saying," Jesse's voice hardened. "I'm sure they've convinced themselves that flooding these valleys and damming these rivers and cutting down forests that have stood for 10,000 years is somehow progress. That profit is the same as value, that everything can be measured in dollars." He closed the folder. "But I learned something different in these mountains. I learned that some things don't have a price. Some things belong to themselves. Some things should be protected, not because they're profitable, but because they're irreplaceable. Jesse gestured to Ray. This man lost his son to greed, lost 25 years of his life waiting for justice. But he never stopped protecting these mountains, never stopped believing they mattered more than money. He gestured to Dr. Martinez. This woman has dedicated her career to understanding and protecting species that most people see as threats or obstacles. She knows that Gray's pack isn't just a group of animals. They're part of an ecosystem that has existed since before humans built cities. They belong here. Finally, Jesse gestured to the Crow Nation representatives. And these people, their ancestors lived in harmony with these mountains for thousands of years before my ancestors showed up with claims and deeds and the idea that land could be owned like property. They never forgot what my great-great-grandfather seemed to understand, that we're not the owners of the earth. We're just borrowers. And what we borrow, we should return in the same condition we found it. Jesse picked up another set of documents from the table beside him. So today, I'm announcing my decision. I'm not selling the Hartwell claim. Instead, I'm transferring ownership to a conservation trust that will protect it in perpetuity. The land will be managed jointly by the Crow Nation, the U.S. Forest Service, and a nonprofit conservation organization. It will never be developed, never be logged, never be mined. It will remain wild, free, exactly as it should be. The room erupted. The environmental groups were cheering. The tribal representatives were on their feet. The media was scrambling to get the story, and the corporate lawyers were pushing toward the exit, their faces red with fury and disbelief. One of them turned back at the door and shouted over the chaos, "You're a fool! You're throwing away $40 million. Throwing away your future." Jesse met his eyes without flinching. "No," he said, "I'm protecting it." After the announcement, after the media interviews and the congratulations and the chaos, Jesse and Ray and Frank escaped to the quiet of the mountains. They hiked to an overlook Ray had showed Jesse on his first week in the wilderness, a place where you could see 3 valleys and the peaks beyond stretching to the horizon. Frank stood at the edge, looking out at the preserved land, his son's decision to walk away from millions. "You know, your mother and I could have used that money," Frank said. He wasn't complaining, just stating fact. "College funds, medical bills, security." "I know, Dad," Jesse replied, "but that land isn't mine to sell. It never was. It belongs to itself. I was just the person who got to protect it." Frank nodded slowly. "I'm proud of you, son. Prouder than I've ever been of anything in my life. You're a better man at 14 than I was at 40. You're a pretty good man now," Jesse said. 2 years sober, helping other people get clean. "That matters, Dad." Ray had been silent through this exchange, but now he spoke. "Your grandfather, Jesse, Robert Hartwell, he would have approved of what you did today. He tried to protect this land too, put conservation clauses in the original deed. But his descendants forgot, got seduced by the idea of profit. You remembered, you honored his original intent." Jesse felt the weight of that legacy. Generations of his family connected to these mountains, for good and ill. His great-great-grandfather who had staked the claim, his grandfather who had tried to protect it, Dalton who had tried to exploit it, and now Jesse who had chosen preservation over profit. "What happens now?" Frank asked. "You're still just 14. You can't manage a conservation trust alone." "I won't have to," Jesse said. "The trust board includes Dr. Martinez, representatives from the Crow Nation, and Ray is going to serve as the wilderness advisor." His smile was small but genuine. "Besides, I've got time. I'm not going anywhere." Over the following weeks, the machinery of land transfer ground forward. Lawyers and bureaucrats and activists worked to formalize the conservation trust. The paperwork was extensive, the legal frameworks were complex, but slowly, piece by piece, the protections were put in place. During this time, Jesse spent his days in the mountains, often alone, sometimes with Ray. He was mapping the wolf pack's territories, documenting their behavior, helping Dr. Martinez with research that would inform management decisions for decades to come. The work was painstaking but important. Every observation, every photo, every carefully recorded note added to humanity's understanding of these magnificent animals. One afternoon in late July, Jesse was observing the pack from a concealed position when Gray approached. The alpha male had spotted Jesse, which was unusual. Normally, the wolves maintained distance, comfortable with Jesse's presence but not seeking interaction. But today, Gray walked directly to where Jesse sat, his single eye fixed on the boy. Jesse remained still, letting the wolf close the distance. Gray stopped 3 feet away. The old alpha was showing his age now, his muzzle graying, his movements just slightly less fluid than they had been. But his eyes still held that fierce intelligence, that connection to something primal and true. Behind Gray, the rest of the pack waited, and among them, Jesse noticed something new. Pups, 3 of them, awkward and playful, wrestling in the grass while their parents kept watch. New life, the pack's future. Gray sat, his gaze never leaving Jesse, and in that moment, Jesse understood. The alpha was showing him the pups, introducing them. This was pack business, pack duty, making sure the next generation knew who belonged and who didn't. "They're beautiful," Jesse said softly. Gray's tail swished once. Then the alpha stood, walked back to his pack, and led them away into the forest. But as they disappeared into the shadows, Gray looked back one final time, a farewell that felt different than others, more final. Jesse watched them go, feeling something shift in his chest. Gray was old. Wolves rarely lived past 12 or 13 in the wild, and Gray was at least that. The alpha's days were numbered. But he had done what alphas do, protected his pack, ensured their survival, passed on his knowledge to the next generation. That evening, Jesse told Ray what had happened. The old man listened quietly, then nodded. "He's preparing. Wolves know when their time is close. He wanted you to see the future, to know the pack will continue even after he's gone." "It made me think," Jesse said, "about legacy, about what we leave behind." "That's good thinking for a young man." Ray poked at the fire. "Most people don't figure that out until they're staring at the end. But you've seen enough death to understand. Life's not about how long you last. It's about what you build that outlasts you." "What do you want your legacy to be?" Jesse asked. Ray was quiet for a long time. Used to think it would be revenge, justice for Daniel. But that's too small, too personal. He looked at Jesse. "Now I think my legacy is you, the things I taught you, the way you'll teach others, knowledge passing forward, generation to generation, like the wolves do." "I want to do that," Jesse said. "Want to help kids like I was, broken kids who think they're worthless. Show them they're not." "Then do it." Ray's smile was slight but genuine. "You've got your whole life ahead of you. Use it for something that matters." August brought change on the wind. The trust paperwork was finalized. The land protections were legally binding. The Hartwell claim was now the Hartwell Wilderness Preserve, protected in perpetuity, managed for conservation rather than exploitation. Jesse's name would be on plaques and in records, but the land itself would belong to no one and everyone, would remain wild and free. The formal dedication ceremony was scheduled for mid-August. Hundreds of people would attend. Politicians would make speeches. Media would cover the story. It would be a celebration of conservation and indigenous rights and the power of one person's choice to make a difference. But 2 days before the ceremony, Ray didn't come for their morning meeting. Jesse waited an hour, then went to the old man's cabin. He found Ray sitting on the porch, his weathered face gray with pain, his breathing labored. "Ray, what's wrong?" The old man tried to wave him off. "Nothing, just a little chest pain. It'll pass." Jesse was already pulling out his phone, calling for emergency services. "You're having a heart attack. We need to get you to a hospital." Ray didn't argue, which told Jesse how serious it was. The old ranger would never admit weakness unless he couldn't hide it anymore. The helicopter arrived 30 minutes later. Jesse rode with Ray, holding the old man's hand, watching paramedics work to stabilize him. Ray's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. But as they lifted off, his hand tightened on Jesse's. "The wolves," Ray whispered. "Watch over them. Promise me." "I promise," Jesse said, his voice breaking. "But you're going to be fine. You're too stubborn to die." Ray's smile was weak. "Even stubborn men die, boy. It's not about living forever. It's about living well while you're here." At the hospital in Billings, doctors worked for hours. The heart attack was severe. Ray's age and years of hard living had taken their toll. The prognosis was uncertain. He might recover, or he might not. They would know more in the next few days. Frank arrived from Seattle. Megan came too, understanding that this was a crisis that transcended their divorce and complications. They sat with Jesse in the waiting room, a strange little family bound by trauma and love, and the man fighting for his life in intensive care. On the second day, Ray woke. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. He would need surgery, months of recovery. He couldn't return to living alone in the wilderness, not at his age and condition, but he would live. Jesse was allowed to visit for 10 minutes. He found Ray awake but weak, tubes and monitors connected to his weathered body. The old man looked small in the hospital bed, diminished in ways that had nothing to do with physical size. "Missed the ceremony," Ray said, his voice hoarse. "Sorry about that." "We postponed it," Jesse replied. "Told them we'd do it when you could be there. The land can wait. You're more important." Ray's hand found Jesse's. "You did good, boy. Better than good. You took what I taught you and made it into something even bigger." Daniel would have been proud. "I'm proud." "You saved my life," Jesse said, tears streaming down his face. "Saved me when I was broken. Taught me how to be strong. I can't lose you. Not yet." "You won't lose me." Ray's grip tightened slightly. "I'll always be with you. Every lesson, every skill, every moment we shared in those mountains. That doesn't go away just because my body gives out." He paused, gathering strength. "But Jesse, you need to understand something. You don't need me anymore. Haven't for a while. You're ready. Ready to teach others. Ready to protect what needs protecting. Ready to be the man these mountains made you." Jesse nodded, unable to speak through the emotion choking his throat. "Promise me one more thing," Ray continued. "Live your life. Don't hide in the wilderness like I did. Balance the wild and the civilized. Be strong enough to exist in both worlds. That's harder than just surviving in one." "I promise," Jesse managed. The surgery was successful. Ray would need extensive recovery and rehabilitation. He agreed reluctantly to move into a small house near the ranger station where he could be monitored but still have access to the mountains he loved. It wasn't the same as his cabin, his complete independence, but it was compromise. And Ray, for the first time in decades, was willing to compromise. The dedication ceremony was rescheduled for September, when the aspens turned gold and the air carried the first hint of autumn. Hundreds of people gathered at Caldwell Springs, the very spot where Jesse had faced down Dalton 2 years before, where the wolves had intervened, where justice had finally been served. Ray was there, moving slowly, using a cane but present. His eyes were bright as he watched Jesse speak to the crowd about conservation and responsibility and the debt humans owed to the natural world. "This land is not a resource to be exploited," Jesse said. "It's a community to be respected. The wolves that live here, the elk and deer and eagles, and even the smallest insects, they all have as much right to exist as we do. More maybe because they were here first and they'll be here long after we're gone. Our job isn't to conquer nature. It's to live alongside it, to learn from it, to protect it for the generations who will come after us." When he finished, the crowd applauded. But Jesse was looking past them to the ridgeline above the springs. And there, visible to anyone who knew where to look, stood Gray, the old alpha wolf watching over the ceremony, ensuring his territory remained safe. The wolf's single eye caught the sun, burning like gold. Jesse raised his hand in acknowledgement. Gray's tail swished once. Then the alpha turned and disappeared into the forest for the final time. 3 days later, a hiker found Gray's body in a small clearing deep in the preserve. The wolf had died peacefully, curled in the sun, his long life finally complete. Dr. Martinez examined the remains and estimated Gray had been at least 14 years old. Ancient for a wild wolf, a survivor who had beaten odds that killed most of his species young. They buried Gray on the ridgeline where he had often watched over his territory. It was technically against regulations, but Sheriff Daniels looked the other way. Some rules, he said, mattered less than honoring the ones who deserved it. Jesse carved a marker from lodgepole pine. Simple, elegant, just Gray's name and the dates they estimated for his life. Beneath that, a single word: pack. At the burial, Jesse was joined by Ray, Frank, Megan, and a dozen others whose lives had been touched by the wolf's story. Dr. Martinez spoke about Gray's importance to wolf research and conservation. Ray spoke about courage and loyalty, and the lessons animals could teach humans if humans were humble enough to learn. But Jesse said nothing. He simply stood at the grave as the sun set, feeling the weight of loss and gratitude mixing in his chest. Gray had been more than a wolf, had been a teacher, a protector, a friend, had showed Jesse what it meant to be wild and free and uncompromising in protecting what mattered. As darkness fell and the others departed, Jesse remained, and from the forest around him, he heard the pack. Gray's pack, now led by a younger alpha but still singing the same songs. They were howling for their fallen leader. A wolf funeral, a pack saying goodbye to the one who had guided them for so many years. Jesse joined his voice to theirs, howled into the night, adding his grief to their chorus. And for those few minutes, there was no difference between human and wolf. Just pack members mourning their alpha. Just a family saying farewell to the one who had kept them safe. The years that followed brought growth and change. Jesse finished high school through a combination of online courses and independent study, spending most of his time in the mountains working as a junior ranger and wilderness guide. He led groups of troubled teenagers into the backcountry, teaching them the same lessons Ray had taught him. That weakness could become strength. That fear could become courage. That the mountains would test you, and if you didn't quit, would forge you into something unbreakable. Ray recovered slowly but steadily, becoming a fixture at the ranger station, telling stories and advising on wilderness management. He wrote a book about his years in the mountains, about Daniel's death and Dalton's conviction, and the boy who had helped him find purpose again. The book became a bestseller, bringing attention to conservation issues and indigenous rights. Frank maintained his sobriety, passing 5 years, then 7, then 10. He and Megan never remarried, but they found a kind of friendship that was perhaps better than their marriage had been. They were both at Jesse's high school graduation, both proud of the man he had become. Jesse was offered college scholarships from a dozen universities, environmental science programs, wilderness management, biology. He considered them all, but ultimately chose to spend a year working at the preserve before making any decisions. He wasn't ready to leave the mountains yet, might never be ready. On Jesse's 18th birthday, Ray gave him a gift. It was the hunting knife that had belonged to Daniel Crowfoot. The blade was worn from use but sharp as ever. The bone handle was smooth from 2 generations of hands. "This was my son's," Ray said. "Now it's yours. Not because you replaced him. Nobody could do that, but because you carry forward what he believed in, what he died trying to protect." Jesse took the knife, feeling its weight, the responsibility of it. "Thank you, I'll honor it, honor him." "You already have," Ray replied. They sat in silence, watching the sun set over mountains that had tested and taught and ultimately saved them both. Ray was 80 now, his movements slow, his breathing sometimes labored, but his eyes were still sharp, still seeing. "I think about Gray sometimes," Ray said, "about how he lived his whole life exactly as he was meant to. No compromise, no apology, just pure wolf until the very end." "That's a good way to live," Jesse said. "It is," Ray paused. "I'm not afraid anymore, of dying. Used to be terrified of it, but these mountains taught me that death is just part of the cycle. Trees fall and become soil. Wolves die and feed other animals. Everything returns, everything continues." He looked at Jesse. "When my time comes, bury me up there, on the ridge with Gray. Let me be part of these mountains forever." "I will," Jesse promised. "But not yet. You've got years left in you." "Maybe," Ray said, "or maybe just days. Either way, I'm content. I did what I set out to do, taught what I needed to teach, protected what needed protecting. That's enough for any life." Ray Crowfoot died 3 weeks later, in his sleep, in the small house near the ranger station. He was 80 years old and had lived more completely in his last 15 years than most people lived in a lifetime. They found him in his bed, peaceful, a slight smile on his weathered face. On the table beside him was a letter addressed to Jesse. The letter was short, direct, pure Ray. "Boy, if you're reading this, I've gone ahead to see what's next. Don't grieve too long. I lived exactly as long as I needed to. Did exactly what I was meant to do. You were the best thing that happened to me after Daniel died. You gave me purpose when I had none. You reminded me that teaching matters, that legacy matters, that one person refusing to quit can change everything. Bury me on the ridge like I asked. And keep teaching, keep protecting, keep being the man these mountains made you. The world needs more people like you. People who understand that strength isn't about domination. It's about knowing when to fight and when to show mercy, when to stand firm and when to adapt, when to speak and when to listen to the silence. I'm proud of you, always have been, always will be. Live well, die well. That's all any of us can ask, Ray." They buried Ray beside Gray on the ridge overlooking the Hartwell Wilderness Preserve. The ceremony drew hundreds: former rangers, conservation activists, Crow Nation elders, Troubled kids Ray had helped through Jesse's wilderness programs. Each one had a story about how Ray had changed their lives, taught them something, showed them what it meant to be truly strong. Jesse spoke last, his voice carrying across the ridge as wind moved through the pines. Ray Crowfoot taught me that survival isn't about being the strongest or the smartest or the luckiest. It's about being the one who refuses to quit, who keeps going when everything says stop, who protects what matters even when it costs everything. He paused, gathering himself. He also taught me that we're all connected, humans and wolves, mountains and valleys, the living and the dead. We're all part of one system, one pack, and when we honor that connection, when we protect each other and the wild places that shaped us, we become something greater than ourselves. After the burial, after the crowds departed, Jesse sat alone between the two graves, Ray on his left, Gray on his right, the two teachers who had saved his life and made him who he was. "Thank you," Jesse said to them both, "for everything." The wind answered, carrying the scent of pine and snow from the high peaks. And in that wind, Jesse heard the pack. Still here, still wild, still singing the songs their ancestors had sung for 10,000 years. Jesse stood and walked to the ridge's edge. Below him stretched the preserve, 5,000 acres of wilderness that would never be developed, never be destroyed, protected forever by a 14-year-old's choice to value legacy over profit. And beyond the preserve, the world waited, cities and people, and all the complications of modern life. Jesse would return to that world eventually, would finish his education, would find his place in society, would balance the wild and the civilized just as Ray had taught him. But he would always come back here, to these mountains, to this ridge, to the graves of a wolf and a man who had showed him what it meant to be strong. The sun set behind the western peaks, painting the snow gold and crimson and purple. Night came to the mountains, bringing stars brighter than city dwellers ever saw. And in the darkness, Jesse Hartwell howled. One long, mournful note that carried across valleys and through forests, joining with the pack's distant song. He was pack. He was wild. He was exactly what these mountains had made him. And as long as he lived, he would honor the lessons they had taught, would protect what they had showed him mattered, would pass on the knowledge to the next generation of broken people who needed to learn they could be strong. The mountains had claimed him. The wolves had accepted him. Ray had shaped him. And now, standing on a ridge in the Absaroka Range under a sky full of stars, Jesse Hartwell understood his purpose, his legacy, his oath. To live well, to die well, to protect the wild places and the wild things, to teach others that survival is possible and strength is earned, and some things matter more than money or comfort or safety. He was 18 years old. His real life was just beginning. But he knew with the certainty the mountains had given him exactly who he was and what he would become. A protector, a teacher, a link between wild and civilized, a keeper of oaths and defender of legacies. Pack. The wind rose, carrying his howl across the preserved wilderness, and from a dozen hidden places the wolves answered, accepting him, acknowledging him, welcoming him home. Jesse smiled, turned from the ridge, and walked down the mountain toward the future. Behind him the graves stood sentinel. Ahead the world waited, and around him the mountains that had nearly killed him and ultimately saved him rose eternal and indifferent and perfect in their wildness. He was ready.